guarded by pigs who exist on a diet of dying breaths of much worthier men. Honey, heaven's expecting you. Just don't get too hung up on who they let in. Just look up at the shine of the pearly gates. You don't need to worry if there's lead in the paint. You don't need to worry if there's lead in the water, lead in the milk, lead in the honey, lead in the caustic embrace of the Heavenly Father. Lead is the flavor of passive perpetual slaughter. Lead is the taste of us led to the ledge by the lure of the legend of expert consensus, and then beckon to stretch it just one step farther. And I hope all the folks who were boastfully gloating and toasting themselves as the heroes of COVID for boosting their boosters and doing their part are now equally thrilled to be starstruck martyrs. All laid in a government grave with anonymous markers, like you're back from the carvers and off to the splicer. You're the very first wave to be slain in the war against Pfizer, that 100 years war against Pfizer. They are thinning the crowd that is striking right now to bleed adequate pay from those inhuman misers, who all sit in their office and designate coffins to people regarded as nothing but profit for Kaiser. Still the Dems want you nicer. Dems want you softer. Dems want you kinder. Yeah, they all want you graciously starving in silence. You will speak when you're spoken to. Rest of the time, you and all of us peasants are merely depressing statistics neglected in Congress's binders. All bled, bone dry, then fed to the grinder. Our headstones line each step as reminders. That's a lesson in object permanence learned in the furnace by workers consigned to the fire. Workers bled, bone dry, then fed by the fed to the grinder. Fed by the fed to the grinder. Now the Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide and your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You let it inside, and you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. Now the Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide and your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You'll let it inside, and you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. And the Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide and your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You'll let it inside, you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, bleeds you dry, then dines on the dead. The Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide and your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You'll let it inside, and you'll see that it's fed. Never you mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. Here's where our leaders would see us all led. Here's where our leaders would see us all led. Here's where our leaders would see us all led. Here's where our leaders would see us all led. The Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide and your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You let it inside, and you'll see that it's fed. Never you'll mind that it grinds your wealth into bread for itself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. The Fed went straight to your head. Mind what you hide and your size unsaid, and your eyes turn blind to the signs unread. Flag bright red, so you let it in bed. You let it inside, you'll see that it's fed. Never you'll mind that it grinds your mind, that it grinds yourself, then it bleeds you dry, then it dines on the dead. Here's where our leaders would see us all led. False alarm. I thought that help was here, but it was my own reassurance bouncing round 100,000 times in my own ecosphere. If every time you speak you keep it off the record, consequently you can keep your record clear. Instead, if you mute the speech that shakes your frail beliefs, you only seek to insulate your image and continue down the stream in the direction clout and credit steers. Directly from your mouth into am I the asshole Reddit's ears. Directly back into the greasy pockets of some Gates Foundation financiers. And then directly back into the frantic final thoughts of early trial Neuralink volunteers, staring at the numb and mumbling vacancies where recently had been their peers. Half of whom are glitching with the memory stuck on pause, and half have zero fucking clue just who they are or why they're here. It's been said that fear is all we have to fear, but that was back before the Basosphere condenser came along, distilling concentrated fear that's diamond pure, crystal clear, oppressor strong, and woven into every single article you read and song they let you hear. And then Elon heard that Jeff enhanced our fears by 86%, and he said, hold my beer. And not a single sheep among the herd would turn their head or say a word, cause they were all too busy begging for the shears, begging for the muzzle, happy just to guzzle, feed, and watch a screen for all their years. Man, to each his own, can't afford a home, but they'll let you have your cozy little ecosphere, where there among your own devices you can break the seventh seal, overthrow the oracles and slay the seer. All the tomes were burned and all the lips were seared. Shut your eyes and all our lives just disappear. Now blink them twice. Welcome to your ecosphere.
When you are not with where majority of Americans are, then, you know, that is extreme. That is an extreme way of thinking.
Set you free, but I really want to let you be. And a part of me wished I could set myself aside, just let you take the ride, just chalk the rest up to destiny. I could let you believe that the only restraints in life are the size of your dreams. Let you believe each kid grows up with the world at their feet. When I know too well it's open season, I know they're taking stock and raising stocks and raising stock. And I'm simply not here to sit and watch as you learn the lesson all cogs are taught. Keep your head down and keep to task and just keep on blocking the rest of it all out. Just keep on with the rest of the herd of a million adjacent oblivious workers. The forest unseen for the trees, and the trees unseen for the fallout. No, what's more damning, baby, the truth or the ignorance? Fuck it, I honestly wonder if I see the answer so well. Baby, believe me well, I know it's scary, I scare myself. If I could find a way out of my head, I would run like hell. I would ditch this body politic, mindless occupant somewhere far from the dismal abyss. In the tranquil crystalline bliss of the beach, I could rest with the rest of the shells. And if anyone asks I'm anywhere else, if I'm really needed, just light the candle, then read the book, and then ring the bell. Oh Oh, my untarnished heart, my little perfect soul. This world will melt your mercy down so they can sell its gold. This world will take your worth and then demand 1,000-fold. It's full of greedy pigs who'll eat you out of house and home. They'll strip your bank account and sweep you somewhere down the road, and then return to eat your tent and shitty bike you rode. Your bottled water, only shoes and coat and broken phone. Then smiling in your face, they'll tell you that the shelter's closed.
When you are not with where majority of Americans are, then, you know, that is extreme. That is an extreme way of thinking.
Hoped you would never find out, knew that you had to know. Pulling what's left of my mind out, trying to tell you so. I tried to block the light out, knew you could feel its glow. Up and here holding my hands out, trying to keep you close. Trying to keep you Oh, my untarnished heart, my little perfect soul. This world will melt your mercy down so they can sell its gold. This world will take your worth, then demand 1,000-fold. I tried to block the light just so I could keep you close.
March of Dimes. Family fun run cancer bonanza. Front page of Apartheid Times. All of the charm of a car bomb. Arms wide open, taking no targets alive. Dark was the night, save for a red glow painting the sky in a sickening light. Like a scene out of hell or a day in an utterly alien life. When the fire runs wild. These are the years where the wild is more your daily drive. To wrestle the truth of extinction from out of the jaws of your pride. So open them wide, now is the time, there's nothing to fight. Blasted or sworn to defy, the end is the same and we're inches away from the line. So abandon your ego to die, the bed that we made is where we go to die. But never was passing in one's own sleep such a hideous sight. Such a storm of convulsion and vile expulsion from out of our mouths and our eyes. But these are the rights they implore us to exercise, with our signature forged and our hands all tied. And with eye contact and a senator's smile, they thank you for saving democracy right as they tighten the binds. Right when they're joining your chain to your neighbors, leading you out in a line. Call it the March of Dimes. One more charity parody. Hold back grants while we dance for the president's salary. Funding the bunkers where all of the wealthy will cower to witness our steepest decline. To err is a trait so inherently human. And to hoard enough wealth that you peacefully sleep when those humans are burning alive is truly divine. If divinity really means withered and fully decaying inside, you could live with yourself till you run out of wine and ring for a drone off a prime, skim a little off at the top of the March of Dimes. Sign of our system of capital, head to the sky with a hideous cry that mimics the suffering families out on the street that have built a career out of passing by, who were part of the great design. Part of a citizen base with its fate resigned. Part of a two-party system where both of the goals align. And the end result is more housing crisis than the plot device of 2009. Capitalism demanded a sacrifice. So I walk to the square, hand them my son, and they hand me the dice. I roll for his life. To an equal extent, you could say I was rolling for mine. I'd called any favor, I paid any bribe. But it's all up to me for the roll, so I close my eyes. And the sound of the crowd is the same for a 1 or a 5. Two equal outcomes playing as though they're on opposite sides.
And I know in my heart that on 4 out of 6 he'll be fine.
We want to have just an off-the-cuff chat between you and me, us. We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.
Who are these people?
It's us. We're these people.
I love that intro. I love that intro so much.
I'm here with a different co-host this time, Oz LaFave.
Hey guys, thanks so much for having me on.
Friend of the show, DJ Joe Nice. How are you, friend?
What's good? And you hear Nick say this all the time. The United States is the most propagandized country in the world.
We are so fucked, you guys. Again, I'm sorry for being cynical, but seriously, we're fucked. We are fucked. We are well and truly fucking fucked.
Just appreciate all the work that you do and the platforms that you all are providing.
Hey, doing good. How are you guys doing?
And as independent media, we have a responsibility to be, we don't hide our bias, obviously, but we must stay true to the facts.
What's up, Pam?
Cheers and salutations. Welcome if you got them.
But I am here with a man that I've been waiting to talk to for the last couple of years, Nico House.
As an educator, what I would suggest is that, first of all, podcasts like these are made.
So you need to be an example for the people and for the future, knowing that your words can actually change the future.
What do you feel? What would Kwame Ture feel we would have to do?
Well, politics is every day of every minute. You have to be aware of what's going on. Not voting on one day, so the vote has never meant anything. So I'm not a Democrat.
See, I would call that guy the Black Obama.
No. The issues that we talk about, listen to us.
As always, kids, labels are bad. Stay independent. And good night, fam.
In news.
Every time I know Collins is just like, ugh, in news.
I die a little. It bothers me less now.
Every time, so, right?
Every time it bothers me.
Anyway, welcome to Iron and News, everybody. It's me, Reef, my co-host, Collin Radix-Carter, and friend of the show, DJ Joe Nice. How are you, friend?
Hey, what's happening, everybody? What's good? What's going on? What's the word? How's everybody doing tonight?
Good. Glad to have you back on. It's been almost a year, but I know you've been, if you want to give a quick update as to what you've been up to, because I know you've been traveling a little bit now. Things are coming back online for you. So if you want to share, actually, for the people that don't know you, because I'm sure we had more subscribers since the last time, care to share who you are and what's your role in this thing we call life, so to speak.
Kind of everything. Yeah. It's somewhat similar to what the great Prince Rogers Nelson once said when he said, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to get through this thing called life." So, Collin, brother, it's always wonderful to be in conversation with you. Reef, you're my guy. Oh, it's good to be on the Indie News Network as usual and as customary. Who am I? DJ, record producer, record label owner, humanitarian, scholar, got a couple of master's degrees from a couple of different schools, but crazily enough, I don't use either of them. I'm a dad, I'm a soccer coach, I'm a DJ, travel around the world playing music. As you can see, look, there's a map behind me, including the United States. I've been to 50 countries. The two causes that I'm passionate about more than just about anything else are reparations for American descendants of enslaved Africans and reparations for anybody who was colonized by European powers. And what I'm also passionate about is healthcare. Healthcare. One of my master's degrees is in a discipline of healthcare from Wake Forest University. And again, many of you all saw my speech that I delivered at the Medicare for All rally a couple of Julys ago in Washington, D.C. And again, I'm going to continue to be passionate about those two subjects because health is wealth. Health is important to all of us. And what we see right now in the United States with the current ecocide, look at how hot it is outside. It's hot around the world, and people are dying because of human beings' irresponsibility for the environment and climate. And health is important, and we need to make sure that everybody has healthcare in the United States, and not just in the United States, but around the world. So that's who I am. That's what I'm about. And I'm also about independent journalism. I don't watch any mainstream news from the United States. I tend to have a global perspective on my politics. I tend to have a worldview on life. I'm not shackled and constrained by the American mainstream news bubble. I look outside to find what's going on here within. And I hope that's an adequate description for everybody that's never seen me before or might have seen me here and there popping up randomly. Some of you all might have seen me on another YouTube network delivering a speech or having a conversation with our dear friend John Farina about a protest I was involved in a couple of years ago, and that went somewhat viral and everybody's kind of saw that. So I've been around, I've been busy, traveling, playing shows again. And yeah, just taking care of my little baby girl who's not a baby anymore. She's 12.
Oh, wow.
Hey, I like it, Picasso.
Definitely need to check in about your princess once we go off air. But yeah, we brought you on. Well, you're basically a friend to the network, and despite your schedule, anytime we're able to get a hold of you is always a treat. So we always try and save something that obviously is what we kind of speak into your wheelhouse a little bit, but cover the stories that we have today, you kind of requested of sorts. And that's why we want to say to everyone here, if there's a story in particular that you guys want us to cover, let us know. Tweet us that story, and depending on what it is, Reef and I will try and incorporate it into the program. But these two that I pulled is kind of what you requested. Right. So you wanted, Joe, you wanted to talk about Palestine, and in light of Jayapal's backtracking on some things she said regarding Israel, I felt it was kind of important. I think this kind of leads into a greater conversation regarding Israel and Palestine conflict, which I think the way we can probably do a deep dive on it somewhat, but I believe that there is a certain issue that's not being discussed, especially within our government, that I think should be addressed. So we will address it first, and then after that, the other story you requested to talk about, Joe, and I didn't know this, but I know you're in North Carolina, so this is kind of close to home to you. But obviously, we talk about a lot of strikes. Waffle House is also on strike too. Yes. Has not gotten a lot, well, not surprisingly, not a lot of coverage, if at all, but we wanted to highlight that in terms of, you know, obviously Indy and Reef have talked about the UPS strikes. Obviously, we know about the SAG strike going on, but we definitely want to highlight this as more of a, you know, not as well known, but given what's happening, I felt that this was also important to share and talk about as well. And then Reef, what do you got?
I got Pacifica Radio Takeover, an article by the Gray Zone talking about particular, I don't even know what to call them. They're a parent company of a couple of radio stations that claim to be independent. And there's some, you know, if you follow the money, you find some questions, as we always know. So we'll take a look at that. You may know KPFK and stuff. I know Jimmy was on there a few times. So we'll take a look at that and some of their takes. And then this no reparations thing that is happening around the Tulsa Massacre that essentially judged throughout this case. And, you know, we'll talk about that. So, you know, good stuff as always. America not caring about its people.
Right. And as always, fam, please like, share, subscribe. We are heavily suppressed on YouTube for reasons. We also do appreciate if you're able to give a super chat or any donation that you can. We do have a couple of people who are officially members, so thank you to you guys. for that.
So please,
as always,
whatever.
Yep.
So as always, please take care of yourselves, your families, your communities first, as far as your financial needs. But anything extra after you take care of those things, if you want to give, be more than happy and more than appreciative for any financial gifts that you are able to give us. So yeah, thank you. And all right, so let's get started. So in light of Joe requesting to talk about Palestine a little bit, and in light of Jamila Jayapal's backtracking on what she said regarding Israel, which she was actually correct, for one. Well, we don't give anyone in the squad or the progressives much credit, but when they do, we do want to be fair and kind of give credit where credit's due, that she was actually right in this case. But obviously, given how our government is so in the hand of the Israel lobby, that she probably was told to backtrack what she was saying. But I think in light of all of this, there is, I think, a deeper conversation that is not necessarily being discussed. And Joe, I kind of call you, somewhat of a historian, so I'm sure you can add a little bit to what we'll probably discuss. But we do have some Kwame in this as well. We have not mentioned him in a while, but he had some things to say regarding this conflict that I do think is important, that I think it should also reflect, if we look at history, the significance of this conflict. So this is how we'll start. So Democracy Now! Actually did a clip on this. This was pulled yesterday.
This is Democracy Now!
Sorry.
Yeah. So Amy Goodman interviews Nora Erekat, who is a Palestinian attorney. So she talked to her regarding the issues happening within Israel-Palestine right now, and then obviously Jamila Jayapal's comments. So this is about 10 minutes. So we'll watch it through, and then we can talk about it after that, and then we'll go a little deeper. So
democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
President Biden's meeting Israeli President Isaac Herzog at the White House today. On Wednesday, Herzog will address a joint session of Congress as several progressive Democrats have announced plans to boycott his speech. The group includes Congress members Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, and Jamal Bowman. Cori Bush wrote, the Israeli government's responsible for enforcing an apartheid state and rampantly abusing the rights of Palestinians. Congress should not be giving a platform to the president of a country that shows no respect for human rights. I will not be attending his joint address, unquote. On Monday, President Biden spoke with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and invited him for a meeting in the United States this year. Biden recently criticized the makeup of Netanyahu's far-right cabinet, describing it as, quote, one of the most extremist he's ever seen in Israel. Israeli President Herzog's visit to the White House comes just weeks after the Israeli military attacked the Jenin refugee camp, killing at least 12 Palestinians in Israel's largest military operation in the occupied West Bank in 20 years. We begin today's show with Nora Erekat. She's a Palestinian human rights attorney and associate professor at Rutgers University. She's author of Justice for Some, Law on the Question of Palestine. Let's begin with Herzog's visit, the Israeli president to Biden, the address, joint session of Congress, and then yesterday, President Biden speaking personally on the phone with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, inviting him to the United States. Your response, Nora Erekat.
So let's just begin by setting up the context that this is 2023 in the aftermath of the legacy human rights organizations, Israeli human rights organizations, UN committees, UN agencies, as well as multiple scholars and independent investigations have all concluded that Israel oversees an apartheid regime. This is also in a context where, since the collapse of the peace process in 2000, Israel has made clear that there will be no Palestinian state, there will be no such thing as binationalism, that they will catalyze and enhance their takeover of Palestinian lands and their removal. They have shifted from occupation to warfare. This is a completely different universe than the one existed in 2000. And yet the rhetoric and the feedback surrounding Isaac Herzog's invitation and speech is one that completely ignores all of that. So it's important to emphasize that this effort within Congress, specifically among a mainstream Democratic element, is meant to normalize apartheid. It's not just saying that they want to defend Israel. They are saying that if this is in fact apartheid, as all of these luminaries and experts have concluded, then in this case, it's okay, it should be an exception, and it should be exemplary for others to follow. And so I applaud the progressive members of Congress who are skipping this address. I encourage other members of Congress to do the same and continue to build the momentum amongst a progressive base that sees Palestine squarely within a social justice agenda. This is already manifest in social justice movements, such as Black Palestinian Transnational Solidarity, that has centered that this is a joint struggle, that has endorsed BDS, and that in fact catapulted many of these progressive Democrats into office. This is also evident amongst the Democrats themselves. Not only has Israel become a bipartisan issue, but for the first time ever, more Democrats sympathize with Palestinians than they do with Israelis, according to a 2023 Gallup poll. Continue to build that momentum. Resist this movement to normalize apartheid. What the members of Congress are doing with the invitation, what they did in response to Representative Jayapal's very accurate statements that Israel is a racist state, is akin to gaslighting, for lack of a better word, but really is normalization that is responding to the fact that they have lost the battle on the grassroots level and are trying to stem from the top down what they couldn't defeat from the bottom up. And we see this not only in this normalization, but we also see it in the passage of anti-BDS resolutions, as well as the adoption of the Israel Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition that wants to equate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism.
Nora, I wanted to play the clip you were just referring to the Progressive Caucus chair, Congressmember Pramila Jayapal, who made headlines this weekend after she called Israel a racist state while speaking at the Netroots Nation conference in Chicago Saturday.
I want you to know that we have been fighting to make it clear that Israel is a racist state, that the Palestinian people deserve self-determination and autonomy, that the dream of a two-state solution is slipping away from us.
After facing criticism, Congressmember Jayapal later clarified her comments, writing, quote, "I do not believe the idea of Israel as a nation is racist. I do, however, believe that Netanyahu's extreme right-wing government has engaged in discriminatory and outright racist policies, and that there are extreme racists driving that policy within the leadership of the current government. We know that the status quo is unacceptable, untenable, and unjust," Pramila Jayapal said. Your response to that, Nora Erekat?
One, I want to point out that nothing that she said was controversial. If Representative Jayapal is wrong, then so are all the experts and the advocates that study this issue and that apply it across the globe. So the attack on her is actually a bullying and harassment attack that is meant to scare everyone else from even having a conversation and acknowledging this reality on the ground, and most importantly, taking responsibility for it. The United States is not just a bystander here. The United States is complicit and a pillar of Israeli apartheid in its provision on unequivocal financial, diplomatic, and military support. But for that support, Israel could not sustain this regime, which is not surprising. Which is not surprising at all, because the U.S. was the last pillar to fall, the last domino to fall in sustaining apartheid in South Africa, where it had to fall in line with everyone else. But during apartheid South Africa and the international campaign against it during that regime's tenure, the United States issued the most vetoes within the Security Council to protect apartheid there, just to protect apartheid in Namibia and South Africa. And here we're seeing a similar pattern. As to the way that Representative Jayapal amended her statement, note that she didn't walk it back. She didn't say that Israel is a racist state. She wanted to make a distinction between Israeli people and the Israeli government. But what we need to understand here, and this is important for the audience to know, that she used the term Israeli nation. And there is no such thing as an Israeli national within Israel's law. And this is the crux of the matter. Israel bifurcates Jewish nationality from Israeli citizens so that it can flow all of the possessory rights to land, to employment, to housing, to the right to life through Jewish nationality in a way that it's extraterritorialized. So that a pubescent Jewish teen who doesn't even know where Israel is on the map ostensibly has more claims than a Palestinian grandma who is 80 years old, who was born before the state of Israel was established in 1948 has to those rights. Under any situation, we would decry this system as being discriminatory, contravening liberal norms of democracy. But in this situation, the international community, specifically the United States and Western governments, want to insist that this exception is acceptable and exemplary. And what I want to emphasize is that it actually is not just harmful to Palestinians, as evidenced by the systematic killing of Palestinians, the removal and the harm inflicted upon them, but that these ideas are not contained just to Israel, Palestine, but in fact are exported. These ideas of what sovereignty should look like are exported across the world. We see it embodied by the Hindutva movement in India and its reigning government. We also see it embodied even in the United States by European supremacists such as Richard Spencer, who says that he envisions that the future of European sovereignty should be modeled upon Israel's model of sovereignty. These ideas are dangerous. And it's not that we want to make an exception here. We want to actually make it clear that there should be no situation where states are not states that belong to everybody who is there, and rather than to a nationality that exists extraterritorially.
And Nora, Eric, I wanted to ask you, the President Biden's announcement that he has invited Prime Minister Netanyahu to also to visit the United States after months of saying that he had no plans to do so, especially in light of the enormous settlement expansion that the Netanyahu government has been involved in. I think the watchdog group Peace Now has said that 12,800 settlements across the West Bank been established since January by the Netanyahu government. Your response to this, the Biden presidency just saying, well, we're inviting Netanyahu to come to the U.S. again.
Listen, the 13,000 some settlements are just the tip of the iceberg. Israel has actually transferred authority of the West Bank from military supervision to civilian oversight. They've basically taken the fig leaf off, that this is not a temporary situation, but that this is a permanent condition, and they're planning for annexation. This contravenes the diplomatic consensus on a two-state solution, which is fraught on its own. But even more than that, this contravenes even the U.S. and this U.S. administration, specifically the Biden administration. They didn't want to invite Netanyahu, not just because of his contravention and violations against Palestinians. I think that would be quite ambitious on our part. But in fact, it was Netanyahu who undermined a sitting president in trying to establish Iranian rapprochement. It was Netanyahu who came to Congress to address a joint session to actually torpedo President Obama's attempt to establish an Iran nuclear agreement and received several standing ovations. This is the Biden administration's legacy. So the fact that not only has this been overturned, but now they're going to invite Netanyahu nevertheless without stepping back any of those missteps, any of that betrayal, is an about face and says a lot about the Democratic administration and where Israel fits, where in as far as the United States is concerned, they've thrown up their hands that they will continue to provide unequivocal support and place absolutely no conditions on Israel's behavior, on Israel's participation, even in furtherance of the U.S.'s national interests in the region.
Yep. Well, I wanted to mention before we get started, do you know Joe Low Key by chance? Rapper extraordinaire, you muted. There you go.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the name. Yes.
You know, she talked about the extent that Israel has ties everywhere. He's been censored on Spotify, as well as other Palestinian pro-Palestinian artists, which to me is wild that Israel has that much power to pull them completely from a platform in some cases, or be otherwise censored. But yeah, I just want to say that that's happening.
There, fellas, and everyone watching right now, there's so much to unpack here. There's so much to unpack here. And the lawyer, I did get a chance to watch this earlier today, and amidst all of my errands and everything else I had going on, I did watch a little bit of French 24 earlier today, and I saw the Israeli president addressing Congress today. And my first thought was, why? Why is the president of another country allowed to address the United States and openly discuss their country's foreign policy with another country? And it has nothing to do with diplomacy. This isn't a situation where, for example, Anthony Blinken is going to China in the name of diplomacy. It's not that. This seems like it's considerably more than just diplomacy. It's not. In fact, it's not even diplomacy. It's realistically, it's racist propaganda. That's what this is. It's racist propaganda. And the attorney said that the Biden administration, it gives cover to the Netanyahu presidency and the right-wing government of Israel. None of that should be surprising to anybody, because the Biden administration is a fraudulent administration. The Biden administration is a racist administration. Joe Biden, and I've said this on Twitter months ago, Joe Biden is almost single-handedly responsible for every adverse social condition in the United States that most Americans live under right now. And if you
Come on, man.
Huh?
Come on, man.
That's our soundboard. So you're gonna hear. So just be.
I missed that. I missed that. If you look at Joe Biden's history and many of his policies, they are anti-Black and they're completely racist. I mean, we could do an entire show just about Joe Biden's legislation that he wrote basically from 1984 up until the Rave Act, which was 2003. 19 years. And he did a lot of damage to this country. So it's no surprise that a man whose career was built on racism is willing to support a prime minister and a prime minister's government that is wholly built on racism. And the racism in this instance is the continued persecution of Palestinians. And if you look at there's obvious parallels with the Palestinians in the Middle East, and quite frankly, Black people in the United States. There's obvious parallels, because if you look at the civil rights movement, Black people were being killed ad nauseum by a white power structure. Take a look at what happened with everything in the summer of 2020, similar situation. Take a look at the land and the homes and the property that is being taken by an Israeli government from Palestinians. How is that any different than what happened with the enslavement of Africans from the Emancipation Proclamation in 1865 up and through redlining and blockbusting in the 50s, 60s, and 40s in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s in the United States? Similar situation. The only difference is the land that was taken from the Palestinians was taken by force. The land and the property that was taken away from Black people by a white power structure was legalized. It was legalized. And by the way, redlining began in my hometown of Baltimore, Maryland in 1910. Yes, that happened. So I'm saying all of this because, and I've said this, Collin, this is something you and I have spoken about on several occasions. We have to continue to internationalize the struggle. And the best way, quite frankly, to internationalize the struggle and for Black people to have any sort of humanity, freedom, equality, and survival in the United States is to align the struggle for Black liberation with the struggle for Palestinian liberation against an Israeli power structure, because the parallels are glaringly obvious. There have been several times where I've attended rallies and protests that are pro-Palestine, and there have been plenty of times during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2000 and 2001 where there are plenty of Palestinian brothers and sisters marching along Black people and other people of color that were in support of Black people, that were in support, that were against police violence, police-sanctioned violence against Black people in the United States. And the police-sanctioned violence against Black people in the United States is no different than the police-sanctioned violence from the Israeli police departments and Israeli police power structure against Palestinians. So the lawyers said that we need to sympathize, that Americans are becoming more sympathetic towards the plight of Palestinians. We are far past the point of being sympathetic, way past the point. Sympathy is inappropriate at this point. There needs to be action. And the appropriate course of action for a racist right-wing government that continues to persecute past Palestinians must be the similar action that was taken against P.W. Botha's government in South Africa. Boycott, divest, sanction. It's as simple as that. Look at what happened with all of the Russian oligarchs. They were boycotted, divested, and sanctioned, and none of them have their wealth anymore. A similar situation must take place against the right-wing Israeli government. And we need more support from members of government, or other, including just the quote-unquote squad. And we all have our issues with the squad. But I fully applaud each of them for taking a stand and standing up for what is right, at least in this instance, because there's no way that a government like the Israeli government should be addressing the United States, quite frankly, about anything, especially when you have lobbying organizations like AIPAC that fund both House and the Senate, Democrat and Republican.
Yep.
So if the Congress has anything or any sort of integrity about themselves, they will stop accepting funds from the from AIPAC, and they'll continue to move forward with fighting for the liberation of Palestinians. And this can't, and everyone talks about a two-state solution. Palestinians were there first. If anything, the Israeli right-wing government that stole the land from the Palestinians, they're the ones that should probably take a look at moving somewhere else.
Be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You know, the Nakba has been incredibly horrific, in my opinion. They've poisoned water supplies of Palestinians. They've, straight up murdered and killed multiple, journalists at this point. They've, you name it. The Palestinian kids, as a pastime, put their friends on stretchers and run through the streets. Like, it's long since, if you're not sympathetic by now, something's wrong with you, So,
and see, that's in Reef, and therein lies the issue. It can't just be about sympathy.
Yep.
It can't just be about empathy. Now, granted, those emotions and those feelings are important because feelings make us human beings. Feelings define who we are as Homo sapiens, as people. But after a while, feelings only go so far. Action is what's needed. Action is what's needed. And it's the type of action that goes past just saying, oh, wow, I hope everything goes okay with those Palestinians. All right. It has to be more than that. Because quite frankly, 100 years ago, there were a whole lot of people that felt sympathy, or 200 years ago, there were some white people that felt sympathy for Black people.
Yeah.
How did that work out? It can't just be about sympathy. It has to be about action. There's two keys that unlock that door. Yes, you need the emotion to feel and understand what other people who are oppressed are feeling. But then there has to be action to end the oppression and the suffering of the people.
And I've heard that before, Collin. Where'd I hear that before from? This guy might have said some stuff.
This guy definitely said some stuff. And but to kind of add on to what you were saying, Joe, I think a lot, because we hear about Israel and Palestine all the time, but often I think what we don't often talk about is the history. And I feel most people aren't fully aware of the history that is tied to Israel and Palestine, especially in terms of the geopolitics around the turn of the last century. Now, this is very short. This is about a minute, but Kwame Ture, this was done, I think he spoke of this in 1990 in Minnesota. So here he's talking about Zion. Yeah. So here he's talking about Zionism, which let's not get it twisted. Like, this whole issue with Israel and Palestine is not in terms of people being anti-Semitic and all that kind of stuff. And I wish if Jayapal had any balls, she would actually say this is a Zionist occupation. So let's make that distinction right now. We're not saying anything regarding like Israelis/Palestinians in particular. What we're talking about is Zionism, which is a whole nother can of worms that no one actually talks about. So, but I think Kwame does a good job of kind of explaining the significance of Zionism here. And then there's a little bit more that I want to add to this. So go ahead, Reef.
That great man, V.I. Lenin, at the turn of the century, wrote a book entitled Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Is it imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism? Yes. If one would read this little pamphlet, one would see here that Mr. Lenin had precisely pointed out that all of the world had already been conquered and divided by colonial powers. There was no else in the world left to be conquered or divided by colonial powers. This is the time when Zionism comes to rise. Zionism comes to look for a state when everywhere else in the world is already dominated. Thus, in order for Mr. Herzl to get a country for Zionists, what he did was to attach himself to imperialism, British imperialism in this case, quite specifically. Of course, as an African who suffered under the heels of British imperialism, I can have no love for it, and certainly I cannot love anyone who attaches themselves to it for the foundation of a state and then call this a liberation movement. Liberation movements fight against imperialism, not with it. Clearly here. The legal foundation of the State of Israel is what is known as the Balfour Declaration. This declaration was issued in 1917. A man in the government of Britain named Balfour wrote a paper and promised the Jews a national home. The national home he promised them was an area which Britain was colonizing, Palestine. Palestine didn't belong to the British, just like Ireland doesn't belong to the British, even though they have troops there. But here, these British imperialists signed a note and gave it to the Jews, and they accepted it. Where is the morality for this? If you say that Israel belongs to you, then you don't go to a thief to get Israel, you go and take it. Once you go to an immoral being such as British imperialism, and this is the basis for you getting the land, then clearly here those who are truly liberation fighters must question this. The basis, we say, is the Balfour Declaration, and Zionists know it. The Zionism is certainly not a liberation movement because it never fought against any imperialism. As a matter of fact, today, Zionism is the baby, child, and infant protector of imperialism in the Middle East. It carries out the interests of American imperialism. As a matter of fact, Zionism and American imperialism is like this. If our tax dollars would stop giving money to Israel, the state would sink tomorrow. And certainly no one can deny that American imperialism is the leading imperialist nation in the world. So we cannot see how a liberation movement is so tied, string, and ham to American imperialism. They work hand in hand with American imperialism. Thus, they can hardly be a liberation movement. In addition to this, Zionism has nothing to do with anything religion, nothing. All religions are concerned with human beings after they die. That's what religions are for. Islam will tell you what happens to you when you die. As a matter of fact, this which forces you to live a good life so that after death you'll be able to enjoy the rewards of heaven. The same is true for Judaism. But Zionism says nothing about the individual after they're dead. They don't give a damn about you. Thus, Zionism has nothing to do with religion at all. And one should not make the confusion here. The Palestinian state belongs to the Palestinian people. This is a fact.
Let me add more to this. To kind of give a little bit more context. So he talks about Theodore Herzl. He was the founder and president of the Zionist organization, I would say around just before the turn of the century. He died. So basically, he was the grandfather, the father of the Zionist movement, as we know now. He died in 1904, if I remember correctly. David Lloyd George, who became prime minister in the UK, around during the First World War. Now, prior to this time, Palestine was occupied by the Ottoman Empire, the Turks, right?
Right.
So by the time World War I came through, there was a transition from Palestine being belonging to the Ottomans to the British. So that was when they started making their move in 1917 to begin the process. Right. So this is when, this was the process when, the Zionist occupation basically collaborated with the British government to essentially make plans to capitalize on Israel being a state in 1948. Gotcha. Okay, so that's where we are now. But Quietere brought up a good point.
Yep.
If something belongs to you, it's yours. That's your birthright. You don't need to make an appeal to the devil in order to get something that is rightfully yours. So this is a key issue with Zionism, and this is a key of what people are not necessarily talking about in terms of this whole Israel-Palestine conflict. This is all tied to imperialism. So it's the idea of the Zionist occupation collaborated with the British government to essentially forcibly take land in the guise that this was their birthright. And essentially pushing out the Palestinian Arabs who were living there and continue to live there, that they're trying to overtake their land. So as I said, it's the idea of if it belongs to you, you wouldn't have to take it by force that way. So, and that's what people are not necessarily discussing. And I think there's the history there that I think people do not necessarily understand. But it's the idea that there's a lot that is tied to the idea of, oh, you're anti-Semitic if you mention Israel in terms of being racist and all that kind of stuff. I would argue more accurately, it's probably more imperialist in its approach than maybe necessarily racist.
Correct.
But it's the idea that the Zionist occupation, you know, and not just Britain, basically the imperialist powers at the time, which included Germany and Russia, in addition to Turkey, were in collaboration with this in order to forcibly obtain this land. So, so I think just knowing that, and just especially in light of what Collin was saying, that's kind of what puts this in context. It's the idea of people going to the enemy to take something that they claim, given a religious standpoint, is theirs. So no one ever talks about it in that way. And I think that's where we need to start having those conversations. It's the idea of...
Where does bombing Syria come into their religion? Where does that? Where does, you know, I mean, that's now, we're funding that, by the way. I don't know if people know, but we send Israel thousands upon thousands of dollars of military aid, including their, what's that rocket system? One of those. One that keeps Iranian rockets from hitting them. Iron Dome, that's it.
Yeah, the Iron Dome system that protects Israel from aerial attacks. And Reef, it's a lot more than just thousands. It's billions of dollars a year.
Yep.
I think it's $3.8 billion that's being sent by the United States government to Israel, just I think in defense. It's more than just thousands. It's thousands of thousands multiplied.
But
so it's a lot.
But you see, but in thinking about that, so basically the Zionist lobby back then, they pulled their money, their resources, and got into these channels to essentially convince the government to do this. And it probably wasn't a lot of them, but they would definitely had the financial and political capital at that time in order to do that. Could you imagine if Black people were able to pull our resources together, or people of color in general are able? Well, we're seeing this with BRICS right now. That's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, I can.
They're beginning to realize, like we're beginning to see this happening now in terms of it doesn't take a whole lot necessarily to pull, especially if you're a person of color, to pull resources among your own together to actually make that kind of influence. You gotta understand, these were not that many people who were able to, but they literally changed history in terms of this. So if you can, so it doesn't take a whole lot necessarily. And this is kind of why I think you kind of wanted to talk about this in relation to, we're talking about labor rights right now. The idea that, you know, it seems impossible or I think individually or just a few of us in order to get something done, but look what it was able to happen. That like this, not even like this was over 100 years ago when this occurred.
Right.
So
they're still trying to do stuff based off a book that was written before then. by people we don't know.
Right.
So, and that's us. This whole, especially from the right wing perspective of this, where they've given AIPAC and Israel itself down, like they literally want to bring about the end times by funding Israel. They hope Jesus is going to come back and, you know, start the rapture. So we have to control Israel, right? Or the Jews have to control Israel for that to happen. So, you know, that's part of it too.
So, yeah. So given that, and Joe, you mentioned, you know, it's good for the squad or certain members of the squad to kind of stand against this. And I think in this case, yes.
Yeah, rotating hero.
They've been kind of flaky. Right. Yeah. But they've been kind of flaky on this in the past. I think really the only one who has been ones who have been consistent with this is Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. Obviously, Rashida Tlaib have been very consistent with this. So I think so. I give them credit in this case, but not too much, because I'm sure they were allowed to.
Joe Biden straight up called himself a Zionist when he was in Israel. Like, I mean, you can't get more on the nose than that. So
so I can't give them much credit if they were allowed to do this. Otherwise,
yeah, it's not going to hurt them.
They would. It's not going to hurt them any in this case, especially since pretty much everyone in government, in both parties, are sold out for the Israeli lobby. So it's not, to me, it's just, I'm glad you did it, but they've been inconsistent with this, or they've been kind of silent on this issue.
They have power. They have real power. They can do stuff. We're just all sitting here talking about it. They've got the vote. They have power. Like, this is our issue with them, is that it's always strongly worded letters, if anything. You know? So it's like Joe was talking about. Without action, y'all shit ain't shit. So
And you know,
and go ahead.
Yeah, and to bring up your point, Collin, you said something about 7 or 8 minutes ago. You said when Israel was created, it was only a few people that dramatically changed the course of history. That's what you said. A few people that dramatically changed the course of history. Think about the few people that could have dramatically changed the course of history if they would actually use their political power as they're supposed to, most notably the squad. Think of, Collin, one of the first times we met was January 3rd, 2020, for the Force the Votes rallies in Washington, D.C. It was me, you, and about 20 other people walking around the 3 buildings that make up the House of Representatives. We had picket signs, megaphones, cell phones, sourdough bread, and reasonably warm hot chocolate on that day. And we were marching around saying, hey, don't drop the ball, Medicare for all. Could you imagine how the summer of 2020 would have looked if the progressive members of the House, if the squad had done what they were supposed to do and not vote for Nancy Pelosi's speakership until a floor vote was offered on the floor of the House of Representatives for Medicare for all? Could you imagine what would have happened? And again, they didn't need every Democrat. They just needed a handful of people. And that handful, the squad, was unwilling to stand up against Pelosi. And conversely, look at what happened with the Freedom Caucus. The Freedom Caucus was a far right-wing section or a faction of the Republican Party. And they forced John Boehner, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, they forced him out of Washington, D.C. into a lobbying position somewhere, I think in the Midwest somewhere. They forced John Boehner, who is as Washington, D.C. insider as you could possibly be, and they forced him out. And again, it was only a few people.
You know why?
It was only a few people.
You know why they were capable of doing that? Because they threatened a third party. They threatened to leave the Republican Party. They were going to be the Tea Party. That is what they were doing. Like, they threatened that, and they had real power to do so, partially because they had enough funding to, like, pull away from Republican candidates. So, you know, without that threat of leaving and not giving these people your vote, they're not going to listen to you. Like, until you affect them directly. Go ahead.
And I mean, for Jayapal being the leader of the Progressive Caucus, she sucks. Because really, she should have, in light of what both of you are saying, she could have easily taken that energy and instead of capitulating to, you know, her peers, she should have stood firm in what she was saying. No, it's racist. Israel is racist. And you know what? I do not stand for it. And I'm going to, she could say whatever. Yeah. And she would have had the backing of at least a few of these members. And basically a lot of people on the left who would have been able to vouch for them and actually make some more noise about it. And now it's gotten to the point now, they've written a resolution now, like I think it was today, regarding, basically saying, we declare that Israel is not whatever some bullshit it is. So they're really just kind of cleaning up after what she said and playing nice, you know, with the Israel lobby, because they don't want to, my guess is they don't want to affect any donations that
Mama Bear is going to send them to detention, and they're not going to be able to sit at the cool kids table at lunch. Like...
Right. In a matter of speaking, yes. So, you know, but, and it's not just this, they have the power to do it. Take your pick. It could be for Israel-Palestine conflict. It could be in regards to Ukraine. It could be in regards to Medicare for All. It could be in regards to student loan debt. They could do this for any of these things. So it's one thing to kind of verbally say or make a stance on Twitter, I do not stand for this. I do not stand for this right wing. As you said, Joe, it's the idea of them taking action beyond the rhetoric and maybe just like the virtual signaling. How about you do something with that power and having to actually have the backing of people on the left who are working class that will actually vibe with you on these issues. So that's why I say I can't give them that much credit, because it's just a whole lot of virtual signaling in what they're doing right now. At the end of the day, it's just a way to kind of give them the cover that, oh, I disagree with this, but they're not going to do, they've proven that they're not going to do anything with this. And Jayapal, as the leader of the Progressive Caucus, really should be leading the charge, but we know how much of a sap she is. So she's not going to go forward in terms of actually, you know, standing on what she said and actually make that declaration and be like, and what are you going to do?
Right.
You're going to vote for more war crime funding.
And something that I think, and I just thought of this while I was listening to both of you talk about this. If these right-wing Trump supporters and Republicans who are Make America Great Again and America First were truly about making America first and truly about what happens in the 48 contiguous and Alaska and Hawaii, don't you think they would be against supporting an Israeli regime also? Because don't you think that all of these MAGA Republicans and Trump supporters would look at the funding that is being administered to Israel and say, wait a minute, why are we giving this government $3.8 billion a year or $38 billion every year? How come that money isn't being used in the United States? We're supposed to be making America great again. Why don't we use American taxpayer dollars and keep American taxpayers' dollars in America instead of funding?
You know, it just comes out all wrong. You know, it comes out as
instead of funding.
Go ahead.
No, I was saying instead of funding a defense department in another country. So again, yes, some of them do, but shouldn't there be an overwhelming groundswell of all of these people wearing Make America Great Again hats to say, wait a minute, why are we funding Israel? Right. Why are we using that money here in the United States? Right. Because if they do that, then their racism finds itself with other racists. Racism identifies with other racists. If you look at Europe, there's a reason why the most racist and most imperialist and most wicked leaders in Europe all tend to congregate together. There's a reason why Alexander Lukashenko and Giorgio Meloni and Viktor Orban have a warm and cozy relationship. There's a reason why. There's also a reason why people like Emmanuel Macron doesn't have a good relationship with the three heads of state that I just mentioned. And even though Emmanuel Macron is just as bad as they are, he's more of a centrist rather than the far rightness of those three people I just mentioned. But again, the inconsistency it remains obvious. If these MAGA Republicans were truly about making America great again, and truly about making sure that the United States and its citizenry comes first, they would also be against the continual funding of an Israeli regime. Don't you think?
Yep. You'd think, I mean, you look at, they smear any politician willing to look at Jeremy Corbyn. He was ousted from his own party for saying the same things that we say about Palestine and Israel, pretty much. They use interesting tactics here. They let particular people speak out, and especially when it comes to the right-wing side of things, tends to come out wrong when it comes to Israel arguments from them. Usually they hit that hard J on this one, but they don't talk about things like our police force being trained almost solely by ex-IDF members. Among many problems that we have, as well as all the NATO funding and medical funding that Israel receives.
And they also talk about the digital surveillance that takes place in Israel that the United States consistently adopted.
All these people that get upset at like robots and facial recognition, they have robots at police check stations in Gaza with weapons attached. That's a robot that shoots people.
And take a look at everything that happened with the Pegasus group. I'm sorry, no, it was with the Pegasus software that was implanted on journalists' phones, and that came from an Israeli security firm. I think it was called the NSO group.
Gotcha.
And they were tracking certain journalists' phones. And the NSO group was hired by Mohammed bin Salman, who eventually executed Jamal Khashoggi.
Yep.
That happened. And that was done with Israeli security. And it's the type of mass surveillance that we've seen in the United States over the past, realistically, almost 30 years. But the single piece of legislation that that paved the way for mass surveillance, everyone said it's the Patriot Act, but in fact, it's actually not the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act really didn't the Patriot Act, yes, eventually did
extended it.
Right, but the piece of legislation that gave birth to the Patriot Act is the Counterterrorism Act of 1995. The man responsible for writing and sponsoring the Senate version of the Counterterrorism Act of 1995 is Joe Biden. And the man who wrote and sponsored the House version of that same bill is Chuck Schumer. And you all can go ahead and look this up and fact check me. But this is what happened. So I don't know why anybody is surprised that a man who essentially wrote the Patriot Act, which is the reason why the United States has hyper surveillance in the United States, is going to go ahead and kowtow to an Israeli right-wing hyper surveillance regime. I don't see why this is a surprise to anyone.
Yep.
And I also don't see why this is a surprise that the one senator that has written more racist legislation over the past 40 years than any other politician in the United States will willingly go ahead and support an Israeli regime, a right-wing racist, genocidal, racist regime. That's what's happening. So why is anybody surprised? Why is anybody shocked by this?
And you ain't black.
Yep.
I guess I guess I'm not black enough for Joe Biden. I guess I'm not black enough for Joe Biden. But I know what I'm not doing in 2024 is voting for Joe Biden. Moreover, I'm not voting Democrat. Let's put it that way.
How dare you? Don't you care about democracy? Do you want Trump to win? Find out more.
I mean, look, and I know we're talking, I know this is somewhat off topic, and I know you're saying, hey, don't you want Trump to win? there are again, 3.5, 4 years ago when Biden announced his candidacy for the president of the United States, I was screaming at the top of my lungs, no, not him. Because everybody remembered that he wrote the crime bill. A few other people were willing to dig a little deeper, remembered that he wrote the crack bill. But if people really look at all of the stuff that he did, let's not forget, Joe Biden is the reason why Clarence Thomas is Supreme Court Justice. Right. And his appointment of Clarence Thomas paved the way for Brett Kavanaugh to be a current Supreme Court Justice.
Yep.
But nobody's talking about this. No one will talk about this. No one will talk about the fact that Joe Biden's mentor was Strom Thurmond, a segregationist, who in 1948 decided to run for president as a third-party candidate. And his third party, the Dixiecrat Party, was an offshoot of the Democratic Party of the United States, not the Republican Party. Here's what makes it worse. 1948, he ran as a third-party candidate, had over 1 million votes, and won 4 states. And that same guy, Strom Thurmond, is the same guy that Joe Biden mentored Joe Biden. And if you remember about the crime bill that happened in 1994, everyone thinks that the crime bill happened in 1994 was just written once. No, there were 3 versions of the crime bill. The first one was written in May of 1991. All written and sponsored by Joe Biden. The first one was May of 1991. It didn't go anywhere. So the second one was written, it was called the Biden-Thurmond Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1991. It was in November of 1991. It passed in the Senate. House Republicans filibustered because it wasn't tough enough on crime. Again, House Democrats filibustered it because it wasn't tough enough on crime. 1992, Bill Clinton gets elected. And again, I'm old enough to remember this. I was 16 years old. I was a sophomore in high school at the time. The only discernible difference between Bill Clinton and George Bush, and let's not forget who George Bush was. George Bush was incumbent president. He was vice president for Ronald Reagan for 8 years. And before that, he was head of the Central Intelligence Agency.
Yep.
So given everything we know about George Bush, the first George Bush, he looked at 3 strikes you're out and said, yo, that's a bit too extreme for me. And Bill Clinton said, yep, I'll do 3 strikes you're out. That's the only reason he got elected.
Those
and then
blue
Joe
dog
Biden
Democrats. That was that little
Joe
group,
Biden
right?
ran. Yeah. So again, getting back to everything we're talking about regarding Israel and Palestine, we've seen that the far right wing of the Israeli government is racist. They commit acts of atrocity. They commit war crimes. They commit crimes against humanity. By the way, tear gas is a war crime, as prescribed by the Geneva Convention of 1925. It's a war crime. If tear gas is a war crime against Palestinians, don't you think tear gas should be a war crime against Black people that suffered tear gas injuries in the summer of 2020 and summer of 2021? Why? And again, we're talking about solidarity. We're talking about, in the words of Bob Marley, an exodus, a movement of the people. Why was there not a group of lawyers and attorneys and legal scholars that were willing to file human rights violations and human rights claims against the police departments of the United States in the summer of 2020 and summer of 2021? Why is the squad not willing to go ahead and do this against the United Nations for every single Black person that was killed at the hands of a racist white cop? Again, we don't need everybody. We just need a few. And quite honestly, we only need one. Because once one does it, everyone else will start to look and say, shh. wow, these police in the United States are really doing some shit against Black people, and they're committing human rights violations. They're committing not only war crimes, but crimes against humanity. And again, this is no different than what is happening to Palestinians right now. No different. The only difference is Black people are speaking English, the Palestinians are speaking Arabic. But if you look at even if you look at the physical geography of what is happening to Palestinians live in an open air prison. Impoverished Black people live in housing projects, which might as well be open air prisons.
Which also
There's
just
really not that much
to add in,
and
this guy.
And real quick.
Go ahead.
Real quick, Reek, before I continue, you know, the lawyer earlier on in Democracy Now! Talked about the poisoning of water in Palestine, in Palestine. How is that any different than the poisoning of water with lead in the water in various cities where there's a high concentration of Black people in the United States?
Yeah.
We talked about Palestine in the Middle East. What about East Palestine in Ohio? What about that and the water that's being poisoned there? What about the lead in the water in Flint, Michigan? How is this any different? Why are people not seeing the parallels and the struggles for Palestinian liberation and the liberation of Black people and low-wage earning white people and brown people in America? Why are people not seeing the parallels? Why are people not doing the mental math? Why are people not seeing the obvious intersectionality between both groups?
I'm against propaganda and gaslighting and poor education.
What about the poor people in Jackson, Mississippi?
Yeah.
What about Jackson, Mississippi? What about Jackson, Mississippi? They didn't have
so
water.
many.
They didn't
Those
have
are the only ones we know about.
Months.
Like, you know what I mean? You know, I'm sure Detroit's water is just fine. I'm sure Chicago's doing great. You know, like,
you know,
but
when we talked about the Palestinian government, I'm sorry, the Israeli government taking land from the Palestinians. Again, later on, we were going to talk about the last remaining survivor of the Black Wall Street massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and her not getting reparations. Take a look at what happened with Black Wall Street. It was a group of angry white Republicans, right-wing racists that massacred Black people and took their land.
Right.
How is that any different than what is happening in Palestine right now? How is that any different?
It's not.
The only difference is the people in Palestine aren't Black. But and I don't want anybody to think that I'm being crazy, but quite frankly, the Palestinians are the Black people of the Middle East.
Yeah.
If you really think about it on a socioeconomic paradigm or framework, the Palestinians in Palestine are the Black are obviously there's obvious comparison to the Black people in the United States. It's obvious. And the sooner that people see that, the sooner I think people can make changes, not only socially, not only at a grassroots level, but on a political level.
Well, here's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Biden admin extends the U.S. habit of interfering in other countries' domestic policies. Now it's threatening Israel with the ending of special relationship between our two nations. As president, my support of Israel will be unconditional. So just tell me you're bought by the AIPAC lobby. You know, in more words. But see Jesse Jett putting his 2 cents in. Good for you, Jesse. But yeah, I'm Collin, anything to close us out with this?
Real quick, before you jump in, Collin, I want to make sure I'm crystal clear with what I'm saying. This is not me ranting against Israeli people. This is not me ranting against Jewish people. This is not what this is about. It's not what this is about. I want to make sure I'm clarifying this.
Right.
It's about a right-wing Israeli government that continues to persecute Palestinians. That's what this is about. And I've said this before and I'll say it again. Racism is a function of economics. But this is also why I'm a strong proponent of reparations. And if you really draw more parallels to this, there's not that much difference, or at least the ethos of reparations is really not that much different than boycott, divest, and sanction. If you really think about it, because when we talk about boycott, divest, and sanction, it's to make sure that human rights violations are ending against an oppressed group of people. And the way you do that is to hurt somebody's pockets economically. You hurt their economic positioning. You hurt their economic positioning. If you think about reparations, reparations are a way to repair the harm that has been done by a power structure over decades and or generations. And again, we talked about this from Dr. Sandy Darity's book, From Here to Equality. It talks about a framework called acknowledgement, redress, closure. There are two paths for redress. The one path is atonement, the other path is restitution. It's inappropriate to ask for atonement because atonement involves forgiveness, and everybody that was around from slavery is dead. So you can't ask a dead person for forgiveness. The only other way to go about redress is through a path of restitution, which is a legal framework for indemnification. It's the only way to go about it. And indemnification involves making somebody whole. The best way to make somebody whole, and from a financial standpoint, is money, is cash, is resources. So when you think about boycott, divest, sanction, it's an economic framework. When you think about reparations, it's primarily rooted in economics. Racism is the foundation, the unfortunate foundation that is the problem for both of these situations, for not only the situation in Palestine, but for Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, people in the Caribbean diaspora, etc.
Yep. Collin?
I have nothing more to add.
Yep. I feel you. We could do this for 3 more hours on that one subject, but anyway.
But Joe, keep in mind we will be talking about reparations at the last segment.
Yeah.
So I'm sure. So hold on. You probably have to repeat some of that.
Your fire for that
sure
that one. You know.
Although I'm sure there'll be people who'll be coming in later.
Yeah, we gotta wait for some other shows
really
to wrap up. But
yeah, and by the way, you're in the chat right now. Make sure you share this video on your page. Make sure you press the like button. And again, as Collin said earlier on, about an hour and 15 minutes ago, he said that right now this program, this YouTube channel, and this show are being banned by the quote unquote powers that be. So the only way to get past the powers that be is to use their algorithm against them. And the best way to use their algorithm against them is for everybody to press the like button, share this on your page, tell your people, give a retweet on Twitter, quote it, say you're like, yo, you know what, that brother Joe nice, he's smart. Yo, Reef, I like that salmon colored shirt, it's tough. You know, Collin, your eyewear is, say something, anything. If you like the show, share it with your people. If you don't like the show, talk to Collin and Reef. Call me up too. We can talk, talk about it. My phone is charged and the bill is paid and my direct messages are open. We can have an open conversation. It's no big deal. It's all
so
good.
funny.
I don't bite. I smell nice.
You smell nice. I'm pretty as shit.
Come on now.
Y'all know it out here.
Hey,
Cue the Public Enemy music, you know? Like, so speaking of music, Pacifica Radio. Some people know it, some people don't. But it's been a mainly independent parent company that has had some interesting stuff happen to it recently. So we'll get into it. This is from Ann Garrison. You might know her from Black Agenda Report. Here she's writing for the Gray Zone. But she's talking about the impending pro-war Democratic Party takeover of Pacifica Radio. And you can see some of their subsidiaries here, notably KPFK. You might have heard Jimmy back on that way back in the day. So as well as WBA and you know KPFA. It's all West Coast stuff, but you know they're important as far as you know they get a they used to get a ton of good voices out there. So she writes, the largest, most historically influential progressive nonprofit radio network in America, Pacifica Radio, faces a takeover attempt by dim party elements. Will Pacifica embrace the pro-war logic it was created to oppose? What do you think? What do you think, Collin? Yay or nay? Yay or nay on the takeover?
Nay.
So I can't imagine the New York Times, flawed as it is in many ways, would be part of some grand conspiracy to implicate Assad. Sonali Kolhatkar, a Syrian, speaks out on Trump's latest bombing on Pacifica Radio's KPFA Northern California, KPFK Los Angeles, and KPFT Houston in April 2018. Okay, so that's where we're starting here, right? So when Pacifica host Sonali Kolhatkar aired an interview with Syrian regime change activist Robin Yassin Kassab, her guest was adamant about one point in particular, that President Trump had not bombed enough in response to unproven allegations of chemical attacks in Syria. What's happening this week, Collin? What's Israel doing right now? According to Yassin Kassab, Trump had likely only struck a few, probably empty, chemical weapon sites. And his refusal to be drawn more fully into the conflict meant that he was effectively guilty of collaborations with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. The actual policy in Syria with regard to the West is not regime change, it's appeasement, or perhaps collaboration. There's no evidence that the United States or the West or the Europeans have actually tried to get rid of Assad. So, regime change is what she's calling for here. Kolhatkar agreed, and together, the two spent much of the hour-long interview chastising leftists who objected to the bombing. Sadly, on the left here in the US, and I believe in the UK as well, we're hearing a lot of people saying there's no way Assad had any responsibility for the chemical attack because he had nothing to gain, she complained, although she never made clear how the Syrian government would benefit by inviting US airstrikes. Collin, you smelled that backpack. It definitely smelled like chemical warfare to you, right?
Sure does.
You went to Duma and had some fun there. By not embracing a more aggressive policy in Syria, they agreed Trump had shown his cards to Assad and demonstrated that the Syrian president could get away with using chemical weapons with little resistance from the West. She cited Reuters, the UK intelligence-linked news agency. Reuters just put out a piece in the last couple of days saying Syria attacked triggered Western action, but on the ground Assad gained. So we're just actively agreeing with Reuters right off the bat. So, under pressure from beleaguered residents and facing Russian threats of further such attacks, the rebel group Jaish al-Islam finally agreed to surrender Duma and leave for the Turkish border. She quoted, seemingly agreeing that the loss of territory by the Saudi-backed jihadist militia represented a disappointment for Syrians. Spooky in the chat saying, paging Aaron Mate. Aaron Mate. So you don't get Aaron, but you get Max. Max will be here. Skeptics of the Western media's intervention-obsessed narrative on Syria deserve our encouragement, not elitist contempt and condescension. My response to fellow Truth Dig contributor Sonali Kolhatkar. God, that name is. Can you make it easier for my Western tongue, please? It's difficult. You know, like we just call you K. Another source frequently cited by Kolhatkar is Bellingcat founder Elliot Higgins. We've talked about Bellingcat before here. Who she introduced to her audience in a 21 segment thusly. Okay, in an age of disinformation and misinformation, right off the bat, great start. Where right-wing authoritarians are on the rise. She forgot malinformation. Are on the rise. An unlikely institution battling such dangerous trends has emerged in the form of an international collection of citizen journalists and computer sleuths. Bellingcat, founded by my guest Elliot Higgins, is the force behind bombshell revelations centered on the Syrian war, Russian political persecutions, and pro-Trump white supremacists in the U.S. So that's where we're starting. In the course of the sympathetic interview, Kolhatkar goes on the contrast Higgins' establishment-friendly output with the work of jailed WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange, whom she characterizes as kind of rogue information warrior, hell-bent on releasing state secrets. You also write in your book, here she continues with Elliot, you also write in your book about WikiLeaks, which enjoys a lot of support on the left of the United States, And often when we think about it, sort of citizen-led accountability of intelligence agencies and governments. WikiLeaks often comes up. I wonder why. But you say that WikiLeaks was about leaking classified information. That's okay. Which is different from what your organization, what Bellingcat, does. Can you expand on that a little bit in terms of the difference between assessing information and making it public versus actual sleuthing, actual investigation, connecting dots through evidence-based research, i.e. controlling the narrative, as opposed to just putting the narrative out. Throughout the interview, Carr defers to Higgins on virtually every matter he turns his attention to, despite the fact that Bellingcat is widely considered to be a tool of US, EU, NATO foreign policy and is funded by private and public foundations, including US and UK intelligence contractors that profit from Western interventions. While the group website insists it doesn't take money directly from government, quote unquote, it's received grants from the National Endowment for Democracy. We know about the NED here as well. How do they say the NED was? What they were doing out in the open, what they used to do covertly, the CIA, isn't that the line? From the founder of the NED. It's received grants from the National EDD, U.S. government-funded CIA cutout, known for promoting destabilization, regime change in states targeted by the West. We've covered that particular regime change here. Although Pacifica Radio established its pro-peace bona fides largely by countering efforts to promote imperialist wars and regime change operations when it came to Syria, different considerations seem to be at play. Instead, Carr represents a new generation of Pacifica hosts who enthusiastically embrace establishment media narratives. A faction within the Pacifica audience and its elected governance structure put forth Carr and another Pacifica host, Ian Masters, as prominent endorsers on their website, New Day Pacifica. If New Day wins the internal elections, listeners are likely to hear a lot more of them at the 5 major metropolitan stations. We got KPFA in North Cal, KPFK LA, KPFT Houston, WBAI, that's in New York, WPFW in DC, in the run-up to 2024 U.S. presidential election. So, paging Mate here, we found him. Progressive radio host Ian Masters. Does anybody know when Assange became essentially a hua for the Russians? That's what we're starting with. We're pretty much calling
Russian
them
scum.
So, Russiagate fan fiction writer James Risen of the Fearless and Adversarial Intercept, that's a great question. So that's who they're talking to, some Intercept buddies, and, you want to hear them say it? Because it's funnier if you hear them say it.
I mean, the details of what they have on his relationship with the Russians are pretty unassailable and pretty extraordinary in the depths of how much he was essentially working for Russian intelligence. So does anybody know when WikiLeaks and Assange changed from being the group that provided us with the information via Chelsea Manning that put him on the map, and I think he was being independently financed, I think, just by all kinds of people around the world. But then at some point or other, I think the Russians moved in. Does anybody know exactly when that happened, when he ceased to be a real independent publisher and then became essentially a whore for the Russians?
That's a great question. I've thought about that myself. I don't know enough about the details.
Move this man!
This guy.
I mean, the details of
no, I don't want to listen to him again. Thank you. Anything to add before we go forward? Because been through a bit,
I mean, tale as old as time. Would you call Pacifica Radio independent?
They used to be
the same way. Well,
they used to be.
It used to be, but I mean, we've said this. It's like we've seen this in Breaking Points. We've seen this at Democracy Now. Even though we just played the clip, it's the idea of how to make yourself viable. In a stratosphere that wants to control the narrative, but to make a profit out of it. And in this day and age, it's almost like you can't do both. You can't speak the truth and actually make a living, or at minimum, even making somewhat of a profit. Like you ultimately the feeling is you have to sell out in some fashion in order to maintain yourself. And I just feel like we talk about this too much.
Yeah.
Especially in independent media, but I think because in a lot of ways, one, we're kind of easy to pick off because we don't have the backing of a larger company where we could just say whatever talking point they want us to say.
I'm still waiting on that Captain Crunch money. It hasn't showed up yet, you know?
But yeah, I mean, you guys in the chat, you guys are smart, and you know, I don't doubt your intelligence, but I also don't doubt what you're seeing and what you're hearing. Yeah, it's just same shit, different media company, basically, is all I can say. It's yeah, that's all I can say.
Yep.
Joe,
yep.
Anything?
And yeah, of course, thank you. And I guess if you look at this from a historical perspective, you know, in the late 80s and 90s, going into the early 90s, this wasn't a problem. You had radio, you had, to borrow a phrase from Fox, you had fair and balanced coverage. You had independent voices on the left and on the right. What happened in 1996 was the signing of the Telecommunications Act of 1996,
right,
which consolidated over, I think, 50 different news organizations into 6 corporate-controlled media conglomerates.
I don't know who did that.
6,
I have no idea who did that bill. Crazy. Who could have done that?
Right, Bill Clinton signed that bill into law. That was a Bill Clinton initiative. It wasn't Reagan. It wasn't Bush. It wasn't Bush again. It wasn't Trump that did that. No, it was a Democrat who did that consolidated all of these independent news organizations and consolidated them into a corporate-controlled, profit-driven media propaganda machine. And that's what you have right now. I have to tell a quick story about when I really discovered that the mainstream media in the United States was truly terrible. As many of you all know, I'm a DJ. I, play music wherever. I've been, including the United States, I've been to 50 countries. One of the countries I visited years ago, I played a show in Tunisia, and I want to say it was either 13 or 14 years ago. And it was right around the same time as the Arab Spring movement. It was also right around the same time as Occupy Wall Street in the United States. I remember I played a show. It was in Susa, Tunisia, which is outside of Tunis by about an hour or so. Played the show with me, my dear friend Ziad, friend Akram. They're both still in Tunisia now. And when I played there, I went back to the hotel and I started watching the news. And I was watching Al Jazeera, the real, not Al Jazeera English or Al Jazeera America, which is now no longer in existence. I'm talking about Al Jazeera in Doha. I'm watching it. And they're showing Occupy Wall Street protesters being absolutely massacred by New York City police officers. This is a news organization in the Middle East. Now, remember, in the United States, all the major news organizations, their world headquarters is in New York City. The only one that's not in New York City is in Atlanta, Georgia, and that's CNN. And you can get from Atlanta, Georgia to New York City door to door in just under 4 hours. Delta Airlines flight out of Hartsfield Jackson takes you to Terminal 2 in JFK. You take one of those $16 buses across the water to Penn Station. 1, 2, 3, A, B, or C, trade down the Wall Street, you're there. No problem. And all of the major news organizations in the United States were just showing a couple of arrests, nothing to see here, everything's okay. Everything's okay. But a news organization in the Middle East was showing everything that was happening with police officers. I turned on my BlackBerry, because you had BlackBerries at the time. You didn't really have smartphones back in those days. And connected to the Wi-Fi, and my Twitter feed was showing just a couple of people being arrested, a couple of protesters, getting, beaten with billy clubs, but nothing too crazy, nothing nearly as violent as what was being shown on Al Jazeera. And I'm watching this on a TV in a hotel room, and it's in Arabic, and I know about 5 words of Arabic, so I'm watching it with English subtitles. And it was in that moment, I was like, oh my God, the mainstream American news organizations are lying to me. They're lying to me right now. Because how could look, NBC and MSNBC is on 30 Rockefeller Plaza. CBS is on 57th Street, West 57th Street. ABC and Fox are right around the corner. Again, CNN is in Atlanta. How are none of them showing everything that's happening? But a news organization in the Middle East is showing everything that's happening to Wall Street protesters. So again, when we talk about this latest organization that is essentially selling out to the Defense Department and other military operatives in order to provide a consistent pro-war, pro-imperialist, pro-capitalist narrative, none of this should be shocking to anybody. None of this should be surprising to anybody. And it's, again, like I said before we started this second segment, it's important to support independent journalism. So if you have the financial capability and means to donate to this channel or this show or any other show that is independent, regardless of what your political leanings are, it is important, because regardless of what you might feel about somebody else's political viewpoint, they have a right to an opinion. But what nobody has a right to is their own version of the facts. Nobody has a right to that. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. No one is entitled to their own facts. So again, continue to support independent journalism, especially this show, because, you know, it's my favorite show.
I am once again asking for your financial support.
What? Huh? Anyway, back to the story. So Ian Masters, we talked about that a bit, left KPFK's airways angrily in August 2021, urging his audience to stop supporting the station because he'd been told to stop ranting about Pacifica's internal politics on the air. But his show, Background Briefing with Ian Masters, now airs on KPFA in the early mornings and afternoons, 4 days a week, with Kohatker's show Rising Up taking its place on Fridays. They have KPF days weekday, 3 to 4 p.m. slot sewn up between them. Of Masters' last 25 shows, 15 have been focused on the alleged perfidy of Donald Trump, more often than not as the lead story. He frequently rails against the sins of Republicans and Vladimir Putin, insists that Russiagate was real, advocates for Joe Biden and his son Hunter, defends the U.S. role in U.S.-Russian proxy war in Ukraine, and calls for ever more advanced weapons for Ukraine. According to Pacifica manager who preferred to remain anonymous, New Day Pacifica are aiming at having Pacifica be an adjunct of the Biden re-election campaign by as early as 24 as possible. New Day Pacifica came to prominence in 2021 when it launched a failed referendum which would have radically altered the bylaws for governing Pacifica democratically. This year, the group is endorsing staff and listener candidates in the upcoming elections for the local station boards. Those elected to the local station boards will in turn elect representatives to the Pacifica National Board, which ultimately runs the show. The P&B hires an executive director who hires general managers who hire program directors at each station, but ultimately these elections are about two things: financial strategy and programming. But the decisions made in the fall's election will ultimately echo across the airwaves of 5 major cities. A recent Roots Action Education Fund mailer quotes Kohatker saying, "We are in a battle for the heart and soul of Pacifica. At stake is whether Pacifica represents the highest standards of journalistic integrity or a mix of snake oil, quackery, and fake radicalism." Indeed, voting in local station board elections at Pacifica's 5 metropolitan stations is open to anyone who contributed at least $25 to one of the 5 in the past year. Candidate literature will be mailed and emailed to eligible voters and distributed at community events. Balloting will take place between August 15th and September 20th, with results announced on October 1st. The anti-war, anti-imperialist campaigns resisting the Democratic Party takeover are represented on the website Rescue Pacifica. In a recent statement, Rescue Pacifica evokes the station's long legacy of peace advocacy, explaining that since 1949, KPFA has stood up to Joe McCarthy and Hewitt and opposed the wars in Korea and Vietnam, as well as nuclear armament. This remarkable radio network has survived many perils, but not all. The message continues. It's never, ever been out of danger. The corporations and their government agencies, the CIA, etc., which subvert the media, overthrow democratically elected leaders, and impose dictatorships around the world, are a standing threat to all independent media, including Pacifica. The group noted that there's a precedent for the liberal campaign to capture the stations. During the 1990s, operatives of the Bill Clinton White House took over KPFA Pacifica. They write in reference to Mary Frances Berry, Mary Berry, a Clinton appointee to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission who served on the Pacifica National Board until she was ousted in early 2000. Her departure came amid accusations that she used her connections to the Justice Department to deploy police against Free Pacifica protesters during a protracted internal dispute. So she called the cops, urging the station's contributors to have their voices heard in the upcoming elections. The statement added, "We need to restore and defend Pacifica's anti-war voice and defend grassroots social justice programs." So, anything on that? Otherwise, that's it. So,
And one more that has to be said, other than what Joe said earlier, support independent media so as to ensure that they're able to speak.
And if you're in these areas and you want to throw $25 to maybe get a vote, now would be the time. So do your thing, people. Whatever. But anyway, Collin, you got another story ready for us. Speaking of people doing stuff.
I do. So this one this was on recommendation of Joe. Since this is local-ish for you, since you're based in North Carolina. So we know of, as I said earlier, we know of the strikes that are happening. UPS potentially is going on strike, hopefully. Riders, workers are going on strike. Didn't know about this. Thanks to Joe for bringing this story to us. Waffle House, or at least this location in Waffle House, is going on strike, or at least has gone on strike by the time that we're talking about this. So we're going to start with a TikTok. It relates to the story very well. Here's one of the workers who are kind of explaining a little bit on what's happening, and then we're going to read an article about this whole thing. So go ahead, Reef.
Dear Waffle House management, we, the undersigned workers at Waffle House, are standing together to demand that we are provided with a safe and healthy work environment where we can adequately provide for ourselves and our families.
Waffle House workers in South Carolina went on strike this week, demanding better safety, pay, and working conditions. Workers at the store say they regularly experience unsafe and violent situations. And this isn't an isolated incident. Many service workers say their bosses are putting them in harm's way, according to recent surveys by the Strategic Organizing Center.
I was working 17-hour shifts back to back. This ended up leaving a toll on me and taking me to the ER. I ended up with a kidney infection, and it was so serious to the point that I ended up on morphine.
This strike is following a wave of service workers organizing in the South, supported by the Union of Southern Service Workers. Members of the union are ready to build worker power and take the fight back to the bosses.
It's important for us to stand up and deliver demand letters and take action together, because without us, these corporations can't run. Waffle House can't run if all of us walk out. We can't let corporations and bosses take us apart.
You're no good. Treat your workers like you should.
Waffle House no good. Time for that. That's the banger of the summer right there.
I can't wait to get into this. Let me catch up.
Yep.
Wait.
There you go.
Yeah, there we go. So this article is written by in Post in Korea. Written by Hannah Wade, where the title is "Working for Scraps: Columbia Waffle House Workers Strike Over Low Pay, Workplace Safety." And so Hannah writes, too much. On the same day that waitress Naomi Harris, that's the girl who you saw speaking in the TikTok, deliver a letter of demands to management at Waffle House on Garner's Ferry Road. She called the police, saying belligerent customers had pulled salt and sugar into go cups and threw them across the restaurant's counter. It wasn't the first time Harris dealt with violent or unruly customers in her less than 2 months at the 24/7 diner chain, she said. It's one of the things that pushed Harris and her co-workers to go on strike the morning of July 8th, a week after publicly serving their petition to organize and enlist demands to Waffle House management. The employees are on strike over what they say are multiple issues related to safety, pay, and staffing shortages. We are working for scraps and pennies, Harris said. We can barely buy the basic necessities that we need to live off of. We can barely take care of ourselves. Around 10 a.m., July 8th, 5 employees surrounded by around 24 other labor organizers began a 3-day strike of a Waffle House where they work, located at 7428 Garner's Ferry Road, according to 2 striking employees.
I could shut down a whole town. Waffle House striking for 3 days. You know?
Shay Parker was one of the workers striking on the bright, clear morning in the Waffle House parking lot. An on and off employee of Waffle House since 2001, Parker said she decided to join her colleagues' strike after hearing them read their list of demands on July 1st. I hope Waffle House will listen and make the necessary changes to be made, Parker said, because lives are on the line for the little bit of money that we make. Among the demands listed in their petition are fair and consistent scheduling, sufficient security for each shift, higher pay, and repairing of equipment, which workers told the Post and Courier included a malfunctioning air conditioning system. The strike is supported by the Union of 7 Surface Workers, a group that describes itself as by and for low-wage workers across the service industry. Workers told the Post and Courier that they've dealt with issues like unruly and violent customers, understaffing, unwanted charges taken out of their paychecks, and working conditions that one employee blamed for landing her in the emergency room.
Well, and you know,
summer school miser,
friend of the show, Jesse Jett, worked at Waffle House for a while. You know, and it doesn't disappoint. Gunfire in the parking lot, stabbings, you know, all the fun stuff happen at Waffle House at 2 a.m.
I mean, we've seen the TikToks and the clips on Twitter where the fights happening at a Waffle House. And while some of them are funny, you know, I will admit, but often not, that's the reality of, you know, like of what these Waffle House workers, you know, go through. I think a few years ago when I was in Atlanta, visiting my cousin, he was living in Buckhead at the time. We went to a Waffle House after we went out, drinking or whatever. And like, basically, I mean, it was Friday night, early Saturday morning. There was basically a fight, you know, that like 2 fights that were occurring, you know, while we were there, to the point where we didn't even get our food because they were so understaffed. They took forever to get food, you know, prepared and everything. I think we probably had to wait for maybe like close to 45 minutes to get our food.
Speaking of Atlanta, guess who's one of the large funders of Cop City? People in the chat already mentioned it. Yep, bingo. So, you know, fun stuff.
But anyway, summer school miser Cochran often worked late night shifts when she first started at the Garner's Ferry Road location in February. Most of the time, she was the only waitress on a typical 10-hour shift, meaning she ate and used the bathroom if there was time, and often there wasn't, she said. The workers' petition cites understaffing as a key concern. Gee, I wonder why. For the safety of customers and staff, we need adequate staff to run the restaurant during first, second, and third shifts. At this time, it is difficult to impossible to take breaks because there's not enough staff present.
Yep.
In mid-March, 21-year-old school miser Cochran had a kidney infection, which he blames on long shifts during which she couldn't make time to use the restroom or eat. Experiencing excruciating pain, she landed in the emergency room, she said. That was one of my worst experiences, school miser Cochran said. Honestly, I never had any reason to go to the ER. I've never really been a sick child or anything. I've always been pretty healthy. She missed several days of work and lost what she estimated to be anywhere from $80 to $120 in pay during the shift she missed, she said.
Those medical bills
said
ain't
another
cheap.
coworker. Right.
You
Like
know.
no Medicare for all, and I'm sure many of them do not have insurance.
Yeah.
So she was probably paying out of pocket for that.
I wouldn't even want the Waffle House insurance.
Or at least
if
her
they gave
family
it.
was.
You know, like
Harris said another co-worker became sick to the point of throwing up in kitchen conditions that workers believe are too hot, which they blame on the faulty air conditioner. It wouldn't be the first time the diner had issues with repairs. Health Department inspections from June and August 2022 reported problems with rusty shelving, broken equipment like dishwashers, and damaged floor tiles. The heat is very unsafe for workers.
That's the Hell's Kitchen
for the
noise.
customers and the workers. Physical safety is on the list of workers' demands. They've asked for security at the diner. The restaurant is only staffed with security guards during the weekend night shifts, employees said. They want to see security at each shift after they said multiple violent incidents have occurred when security isn't there.
Yeah.
I've been threatened to be pulled across the counter over a wrong order, School Manager Cochran said. I've had a guy who came in very belligerent a few months ago, and I declined to serve him. He flashed a knife at me. She often relies on her cooks to act as impromptu security in those situations, she said. A month before staff serving management with their petition, a customer with a gun threatened, Jesus.
Dude, I'm hitting a motherfucker with some hot grits. I don't give a fuck. You know, like, motherfucker's gonna catch a skillet.
I'm laughing, but this is happening while they're protesting. Like,
I know. Yeah. Fucked up, dude.
A month before staff serving management with their petition, a customer with a gun threatened Harris and other staff over an order of hash browns. She said.
I asked for it chunk.
I was like, dang, I'm finna die over some hash browns, Harris said. That's all I could think about. I'm about to die over hash browns.
I'm like, what the fuck, dude? Just please find other employment. Like, fuck what? Just everyone leave. You know?
Can you zoom out, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Other Waffle House locations across South Carolina have faced issues with safety. A Waffle House in Kearnshaw was robbed in March. In January 2022, a Columbia Waffle House employee was robbed at gunpoint. The July 1st phone call Harris made to police related to the unruly customers was confirmed by the Columbia Police Department. Aside from what workers called unsafe conditions, employees said their weekly pay is not enough to make ends meet, a common plight of minimum wage workers across the country.
Yep.
All my money goes straight to rent and bills. I can't even afford to buy myself groceries, School Manager Cochran said. She often gets help from her parents when it comes to groceries and food, she told the Post and Courier. She has applied for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, often called food stamps, 3 times and has been denied. Yep. The waitress said they make the federal minimum wage for tip workers, which is $2.13 per hour. The intention is that the bulk of their income will probably come from tips. School Manager Cochran, right, and who gives tips if they're, and considering that the food is very cheap, it's not going to be like, you're not going to get a lot of tips out of that either way.
No,
if you're lucky to get a tip.
If people going to the Waffle House don't have the money to like give you for tips,
right?
Like,
right. School Manager Cochran estimates she works anywhere from 21 to 35 hours each week, and with tips, brings in a salary ranging from $70 some weeks to $170 in others. When she's not working at Waffle House, she holds down a second job as an assistant property manager for a storage facility.
As they often do.
If you work 40 hours a week, you should make a wage where you don't have to still live in poverty or still live on governmental assistance. State Rep Annie McDaniel, Democrat Fairfield, told the Post and Courier. That just should not be in this great state of South Carolina.
Great state.
McDaniel spoke in support of the workers when they publicly delivered their petition July 1st and appeared on a TikTok video they posted in support of their office, what we just saw. The workers are also concerned about deductions from their pay that they believe are unfair. Employers are allowed to deduct charges for goods and services from employee paychecks, including for
meals or lodging.
According to the U.S. Department of Labor. But workers say Waffle House doesn't let them opt out of being charged for meals during their shifts. It's a policy that the Garner's ferry workers want changed.
Food that they end up
the Waffle House
out
corporate
at the end of the day.
Right. The Waffle House corporate employee handbook meal credit policy provided to the Post and Courier by an organizer with USSW states, meals are made available to non-exempt hourly restaurant associates as a condition of employment, and the company will automatically take a meal credit against wages otherwise due a non-exempt restaurant associate, and the associate's wages will be reduced by the amount of the meal credit taken based on the hours worked by the associate per day in accordance with meal credits guidelines set by the company. Why isn't it for free? Why don't they eat for free? That's the very least you can do.
It's about the money, Lebowski. You know?
Anyway, workers at the Garner's Ferry Waffle House said in practice at their store, this translates to a little over $3 per shift coming out of each paycheck for a mandatory meal. And if the workers either don't have time to eat during their shifts or choose not to eat a meal that day, it still comes out.
Oh, that's even more fucked up.
They're going to take out that money from my check for that meal deduction, whether I eat or not, Harris said. You can't opt out of it. The employees' petition calls to the company to end the mandatory meal deductions from wages. Or better yet, just give them the food. As we said, they're going to throw it away anyway. Like,
you greedy dirtbag.
But cooks like 46-year-old Jesse Gant, who has worked for the company for 24 years, hourly pay sits a little higher. Gant said she makes $16 an hour, but doesn't believe that's enough for the time she has worked for the company. That's a whole lot of bacon, eggs, and waffles, Gant said July 8th as the strike got underway. I've lost track of how many meals I've cooked. Waffle House declined to comment on specific issues brought up by the employees. In a statement to the Post and Courier, the company said, Waffle House is proud of its long record of effectively addressing any concerns our associates report to us. We intend to do that directly with our associates. In the parking lot during the July 8th strike, a 67-year-old onlooker smoked a cigarette as he told a Post and Courier reporter that the workers on strike were ungrateful. I think it's ridiculous. They could make more money in tips, and they want to stand out here and strike, said George Kimberly, a Waffle House regular. They don't look at the big picture for the company. You can get fuck yourself. But other bystanders spoke out in support.
Shame.
One older gentleman told workers to stand your ground. Staff at Waffle House has joined other service workers across the state and country who organized in response to low pay, harsh working conditions, and staff shortages. In July 2022, baristas made Columbia's Millwood Avenue Starbucks defer to unionize in South Carolina, part of a national wave of unionizations for the coffee giant. And in January, employees at a Dollar General in Irmo went on strike, citing issues with staffing shortages, safety, and pay, which was also supported by the USSW. The group takes a different approach from traditional labor organizing, which typically focuses on establishing formal unions. Instead, the USSW aims to cut out the oftentimes lengthy unionization process by supporting worker organization through other means, like striking and handing out demand letters. Nothing's sacred. We're ready. There's power in numbers, Harris said. We're going to keep fighting by any means necessary. Gee, I wonder which organization that we talk a lot about should be doing this.
Yeah, would be smart.
I mean, we don't need to say them here because we talk about them often enough, and we talked about them and how do we miss that over the weekend.
I mean, Waffle House got that
Catch me outside. How about that?
energy, and I'm fucking here for it. Like, keep that up.
So actually, this is probably one of the better labor-based stories we've covered, just as far as they know what they're up against and they're doing the thing. They're making clear demands and they're going for it. They're not waiting, for certain things to rise to strike. They're just going ahead and do it. And more importantly, they're standing in solidarity with other labor workers from other places, which again, and I've said this, the fact that the teachers or National Teachers Union and the Nurses Union have already endorsed Joe Biden for president a year and a half out, when there should be the solidarity among labor right now, not just with them, but with every labor union possible in the country right now, should be coming together. Like the idea that only certain groups in the labor movement are striking and some are not, I think is just completely ridiculous. Like this should be more of a massive movement, which is why I kind of say, like, I don't have any hope in the labor movement, given there's no loyalty to labor at all among these different industries. It's just the idea of, like, if you're in a white collar labor, then you're kind of going against blue collar. But again, good job to this Waffle House. Joe, since you brought this story to us, your thoughts.
Something that I've said ad nauseum on various podcasts is that we need mass worker strikes across this country, not only intra-industry, but inter-industry. This is the type of labor movement that America sorely needs. It's the type of labor movement that we should have had back in the summer of 2020 when NBA players went on what's called a wildcat strike after the shooting of, it was Jacob Rude, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so, yeah.
He was shot 7 times in the back by a white police officer named Rustin Shesky while he was unarmed. The Milwaukee Bucks, and this happened just outside of Milwaukee. The Milwaukee Bucks said, we're not playing this basketball game tonight. The NBA playoffs, they can take a rest. And other sports leagues followed suit. And it was Barack Obama that convinced the players to go back to playing basketball. And then there was this mass social justice facade that took place in the NBA by painting Black Lives Matter on the courts, by having inspirational words replacing the names of the players on the backs of the jerseys, and it all amounted to a whole lot of nothing.
Thanks, Obama.
America now more than ever needs labor-focused movement, because if we want our political outcomes to change, it's not going to happen through political means, because political means got us to where we are now. If we look at some of the labor movements that we've seen around the world, Che Guevara, take a look at what happened in Poland about 40 years ago with Lech Walesa. Lech Walesa was not a politician. He was an electrician by trade. He was an electrician and eventually became president of Poland. You take a look at with Evo Morales. Evo Morales was a labor. He was a farmer, and he led a group of farmers in a labor union, and eventually became president of the country. Evo Morales in Bolivia, if I'm not mistaken. So we need a mass workers movement across this country, and as I said about an hour or so ago, the racism is a function of economics. And the whole reason, quite frankly, why Donald Trump got elected was Donald Trump is the first rich white person to appeal to poor white people. Again, economics. There's a whole lot of people who are in this Waffle House strike and some of the other strikes that are taking place right now, most specifically the United Parcel Service strike that's going to happen. And I guarantee you, their solidarity is not about that some people being a Trump supporter or some people being a Biden supporter. Their their solidarity comes from labor rights. Their solidarity comes from being the ability to unionize. By the way, for those that don't know this, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has 30 articles which describe certain basic tenets that of basic human and civil rights that all people on earth should have, simply on the basis of being human. Article 23 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that the ability to have labor rights, the ability to unionize, is a human right. Think about how labor unions have been crushed in the United States. Take a look at 1947 with the Taft-Hartley Act. Take a look what happened most recently with NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. What was left of unions after the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947 was completely crushed by the North American Free Trade Agreement. By the way, one of the main architects of NAFTA and one of the co-sponsors of NAFTA was none other than Joe Biden. You can go ahead and look that up. He was part of that whole situation. So something that I've been a major proponent of, and you guys have seen me do this, and whenever I play a show on a Saturday night, I always make sure I wear a yellow vest, and I always talk about the yellow vest movement that's been taking place in France over the past several years. The yellow vest movement is not a political movement. It's not a group of people who are leftist supporters or Jean-Luc Mélenchon supporters. And it's not a group of people who are right-wing supporters or people who support Marine Le Pen. This is about labor rights. It's about labor, and it's about making sure that the centrist and neoliberal policies of Emmanuel Macron, who is a banker by trade and never held political office before he became president of France, takes over. It's about labor rights. The yellow vest is about labor rights. The black vest, or the gilet noir, is also about labor rights. Why can't we have that sort of labor-focused movement in the United States? Why didn't we have this sort of labor-focused movement in the United States during the pandemic? What would have happened if a group of HVAC workers, UPS, and a bunch of deli people slicing deli meat at Safeway, and a couple of bakers at your local Whole Foods decided to say, we're not doing anything until everybody gets health care?
Partially because we've seen what that happens in America before. Pinkerton comes out with Gatling guns, and eventually.
I mean, again, a group of steam fitters that install water heaters could have said, we're not doing anything until everybody gets their $600 a week.
Yep.
We're not fixing water heaters. We're not changing your oil at Jiffy Lube. We're not slicing your deli meat at Safeway. We're not putting that frosting on the cake at Whole Foods. We're not doing anything. We're not doing anything. The people at 84 Lumber, no, we're not stacking wood in your truck. Sorry, we're not doing anything until everybody gets what they're supposed to get. There needs to be a mass workers' strike across this country. And I'm hoping what happens with Waffle House, I'm hoping what happens with UPS, I'm hoping with the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors Guild. And by the way, I have a couple of friends of mine who work in the entertainment industry who are currently dealing with not working right now.
Yep.
And we don't know when they're going to be able to get back to work. Everybody needs to stand in solidarity. If you are a working person in America, you should be standing alongside UPS. Why isn't FedEx jumping on board with this? Why isn't DHL doing something with this?
Mm-hmm.
If Waffle House is willing to go ahead and say, no more hash browns, no more orange juice that we're not really sure is actually juice, no more coffee, no more ham and cheese biscuits. We're not making any food until all of us get what we're supposed to get. Why isn't Burger King jumping on this? What about McDonald's?
Right.
What about Chick-fil-A? What about Five Guys? Any of these fast food places? What about the restaurants of the United States? Applebee's, Chili's, etc. Why aren't they signing along with this? Because again, if you're serving food in a Waffle House, and Waffle House is as bad as it gets from a culinary perspective, Why aren't five-star restaurants doing the same thing? Because if they could do this at a Waffle House and completely overwork employees and make them feel unsafe, don't you think that could potentially happen in a 1 or 2 or 3-star Michelin rated restaurant? Potentially. Why couldn't it happen there? Not necessarily in terms of the safety issues, but in terms of overworking their employees, putting them through 16, 17, and 18-hour shifts. Why isn't that happening?
Yep.
There needs to be a mass workers' strike across this country. Shut this entire country down. The workers of the world need to unite, not just the workers of the United States, the workers of the world, because this is also happening. These sorts of the continued exploitation of workers is not just happening in the United States. It's happening in Canada. It's happening in the UK. It's been happening in France, Yellow Vest movement, and it's happening in plenty of other countries around the world. The workers of the world must unite against exploitative multinational corporations that continue to extract labor and resources from poor indigenous people, from Black people, from other people of color, from impoverished white people. It's time to take a stand. It's time to take a stand. This is not about color of people's skin. This is not about a political affiliation. This is not about sexual orientation or gender identification. This is not about your religious affiliation. No, this is about labor. This is about getting up in the morning, going to work, and coming home at night and earning an honest day pay. And every 2 weeks, you get your money directly deposited into your checking or savings account. This is about labor. This is about making sure that people have a reason to get up in the morning and stay there at night and go to bed at night. And look, and Collin, brother, you said something that's brilliant. You said something earlier about 20 minutes ago when you said, yeah, there seems to be a beef between white collar and blue collar. There seems to be a beef between white collar and blue collar. Again, that is a class struggle, quite frankly. It's a class struggle. Look, there is no shame in going to a job where you have to have a shower when you come home from work, as opposed to having to take a shower before you go to work. There's no shame in either type of work. But white people in white collar positions also need to realize that they are being screwed also.
Right.
Being screwed also. Take a look at all the layoffs that have been happening in the tech sector over the past few years. Take a look at all of this. Take a look at all of the potential layoffs that are going to happen with the Screenwriters Guild, because AI could potentially take their jobs.
Right. For the jobs. They're taking our jobs.
Take a look at Wall Street. Take a look at the financial sector. So if you're wearing a Brooks Brothers suit or a Boiler suit, it doesn't make a difference. Your job is at risk, and there is strength in numbers. There is solidarity in numbers. My uncle told me this years ago. He said, Jojo, he would always call me Jojo because my dad was named Joe also. He'd always say, Jojo, you got to move as a fist, not as fingers. You have to move as a fist, not as fingers, because if you're separate, there's no impact. You can't make impact when you just have 5 fingers floating around. But if you have a fist and everybody's together, solidarity, strength in numbers, that's when you can make an impact. You can't punch somebody with an open hand like this unless you're Bruce Lee, but Bruce Lee was supernatural.
Anderson Silva, eye pokes are a thing, you know? Like,
yeah.
Well, yeah, I feel you.
Yeah, but strength in numbers, solidarity, coming together. Okay, coming together. There's a reason why in the 60s, the Black Power symbol was a fist. It was a fist. It was about unity. It was about coming together. It was about coming together. And it wasn't just about Black people coming together. Take a look at what Fred Hampton was doing. He was getting a group of Chicanos together. He was getting poor white people in alignment with Black people. This is quite honestly no different than what I talked about 2 hours ago with the Palestinian struggle and how Black people need to align themselves with the struggle for Palestinians. Again, it's the same type of unity we're talking about. There, it's a persecution. It's a persecution of a right-wing Israeli government against Palestinians, similarly to a racist American government towards Black people, American descendants of enslaved Africans, immigrants, indigenous people, etc. But again, this is about labor rights. It's about labor rights. It's bourgeoisie versus proletariat. It's the haves versus the have-nots. And the haves are winning right now. And it's time for the have-nots to take something from the haves. It's not about eating the rich. It's never about eating the rich. No, it's about making sure that the workers of the world get what they're supposed to get for a fair day and an honest wage, an honest work environment, safe working conditions. Collin, you're a teacher. You're a teacher. My ex-wife was a teacher. There are plenty of instances where she had to deal with students who were at minimum unruly and at worst unhinged and unsafe.
I mean, Reef and Reef, those of this my my two in particular this past school year that, you know, if I were a less experienced teacher, I would have been out of the field already. They know. So, but yeah, I think again, it's just the idea of this should be, while it's encouraging to see pockets of these labor strikes or potential strikes happening,
right?
It's frustrating that there should be more of a coalition or cohesion among all labor right now. Because as you said, you know, even in the white collar jobs, you know, our jobs are at risk as well. And we're not safe in terms of, you know, in areas of tech, in education, in finance, especially as things are becoming more streamlined and moving more on the tech side of being more automated. There doesn't need to be people doing the things that originally, you know, like a person had to do it. So,
right. I mean, you can program to do everything that a certified public accountant can do now. What good is it? What good is a CPA when you can go ahead and have a AI program do your books for you or do your taxes? What's the point? And something else that I wanted to go ahead and talk about with regards to the Waffle House strike. And I just thought about this in the context of a slide that you were reading, Collin, about 15 minutes ago regarding the lady with the hyphenated name and healthcare and going to the hospital.
Right.
Something that I have a little bit of knowledge about is healthcare in the United States. And as I'm sure you all know, the Affordable Care Act is not a Democratic policy. It's a Republican policy.
Romney Care.
The Heritage Foundation, correct. It's essentially Romney Care or Mass Care. The Republican Party, a conservative think tank called the Heritage Foundation, created what's called a three-legged stool model of healthcare. The three legs of the stool are access to insurance through the Medicaid expansion, government subsidies, and a fancy rule called the individual mandate. Now, normally I would say let's focus on the individual mandate, but for the context of this story here, I want us to focus on the Medicaid expansion. There are now 41 states in the United States that have accepted the Medicaid expansion under the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. Now, you're probably like, well, yo, Joe, nice. What's the Medicaid expansion? Let me explain what that is. The federal government, most specifically the Department of Health and Human Services, provides each state with a particular amount of money called a block grant. The federal government says, hey, state, here's a bunch of money. You can use it for whatever you want as long as it is related to healthcare. So what most states have done, instead of providing direct clinical care, what most states end up doing is expanding the maximum salary allowed in a particular state, so more low-wage earners can qualify for Medicare. But what it does, every state in the United States has this unfortunate phenomenon, and it is what's called the coverage gap, where you can have a wage earner that makes too much money to still qualify for Medicaid, but not enough money to qualify for Obamacare premium subsidies. Every state in America has this, what's called the coverage gap. In some states, that did not accept the Medicaid expansion, like South Carolina, the coverage gap is huge because they didn't automatically raise the maximum salary allowed to still qualify under Medicaid. Okay, so in a state like South Carolina, you might be working part-time, but not necessarily have enough hours, and you might not have the means or capability to have a second job. So you might make just enough money to not qualify for Medicaid, and you make too much money to qualify under Obamacare for premium subsidies, which means you are screwed because you can't possibly afford health insurance. There's no way that could happen. So this might be another part of the reason why this strike is happening in South Carolina, because they're a state that did not accept the Medicaid expansion. They didn't accept it. Georgia did not accept the Medicaid expansion. A bunch of the states that did not accept the Medicaid expansion are in the southern part of the United States, which is no coincidence because many of the governors of those states during the passing of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act were Republican governors that did not want to do anything that would be seen as supporting a Black president in Barack Obama. And they also did not want to do anything that was supporting or helping anybody in their states, especially poor white people and Black people. Now, if it goes to help rich white people, they're all for it. Take a look at Brett Favre. Take a look at what happens with him. But if it involves making sure that poor white people and Black people get an opportunity to have help, get health care, get affordable housing, get grocery stores in their neighborhoods so they don't have to worry about food deserts. No one wants to deal with that. So this is such an important topic because I think the mainstream news of the United States doesn't talk about labor movements. Look at what happened a couple of years ago in India when 250 million farmers went on strike. That is 250 million with a B people went on strike. And then a bunch of civil servants decided to join them. Then a bunch of truck drivers decided to join the civil servants and the 250 million farmers that were already on strike. American mainstream media didn't even bother talking about that.
Oh, no, they don't want to give people ideas.
You don't want to give people ideas, right? And again, 250 million people is 25%, just about 25% of India's population. Could you imagine what would happen in the United States if 25% of America's population went on strike, or about 81 or 82 million people went on strike? What do you think would happen? Could you imagine if 8 million people went on strike in the United States? And again, Collin, this goes back to your point. It doesn't need to be a whole lot of people. It just needs to be a few people here and there in the right places. No different than the power that the squad could have exercised. No different than the power that the Tea Party or the Freedom Caucus could have exercised. No different than a group of Zionists that eventually took over what is now known as Israel. Again, small group of people, but could you imagine if there was intersectionality and solidarity in the working class in the United States? And again, I'm not asking for 25% of the American population to go on strike. Could you imagine, again, if 8 million workers went on strike, and it has to be the right 8 million workers, grocery store employees, truck drivers.
You could basically say essential workers. If
any, all of that, any and all.
Take your pick within that. The ones that were essentially called heroes during the pandemic are now.
Remember, kids, sing it with me. You got the power.
Heroes.
Take it back.
America is boiling right now under excessive heat. Excessive heat. What do you think would happen if HVAC workers decided to go on strike tomorrow morning?
Oh my God.
A union of workers said, yo, we're not doing anything until. Think about this. What do you think would happen? What do you think would happen if a bunch of HVAC employees and a bunch of swimming pool installers in Texas, Florida, and Arizona and California said, we're shutting it down. We're not doing anything until see all that $600 a week back pay that the government still owes a lot of us? We want everybody gets that back. Then we'll start thinking about fixing your air conditioning. Then we'll start thinking about filling up your swimming pools with water that we might not necessarily have.
Yep. How does unity go, Collin? How's that unity work? This
Unity doesn't represent what you're against. It represents what you are for.
Have those demands ready.
Look, there's an old saying, if you want an omelet, you have to break a couple of eggs. If you want an omelet, you have to break a couple of eggs. And maybe this is this now more than ever, this is a time for the working class of the United States to break a couple of eggs.
Yep.
And if the breaking of a couple of eggs means, you know what, there's going to be some people that have to deal with their houses being a little bit warmer than it already is right now, so be it.
Yep. Don't let those orcas keep coming from those yachts. It's gonna, you know what I'm saying? So anyway, on to our last story this evening. No reparations for you. No, you can't have. So Tulsa race massacre, court tosses reparations case, right? So this is Arena Campo Flores and Jennifer Calfos. Where exactly is this from? I have it in the description, right? It is
Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, Wall Street Journal. You're correct. So an Oklahoma judge dismissed a lawsuit brought by 3 survivors of the 1921 Tulsa race massacre who sought reparations for the attack in the city's Greenwood district, at the time one of the wealthiest black neighborhoods in the U.S. Tulsa County District Judge Carolyn Wall dismissed the case filed against defendants including the city of Tulsa and the Tulsa Region Chamber with prejudice Friday, according to a court docket entry. Dismissing with prejudice means the case can't be refiled, but it is possible for the decision to be appealed. Okay, so
that judge should be hanged. She should be hanged.
The victims of the Tulsa race massacre were denied reparations, even though they were harmed by the massacre. This is how the U.S. feels about black people, says Jay Buffont, friend of the show, RBN member. Anyway, I'd like one of you to tell the people at home who don't know, what exactly was the Tulsa race massacre? Because I know they don't teach that in schools. So
no, they don't. They're trying to get rid of it in Florida because Ron DeSantis wants to eliminate anything that involves telling the truth about what happened to black people in America. That's what happened. But yeah, Tulsa race massacre happened in 1921. Angry mob of white people saw a group of black people in the historic Greenwood section of Tulsa, Oklahoma, doing quite well. They had homes, their own schools, their own businesses. And an angry mob of white people decided to burn down all these buildings, burn down all the properties. Millions of dollars of wealth was lost. The area was never able to rebuild again. And the United States government has consistently denied not only the people who suffered the direct losses of their property reparations and indemnification, but obviously the descendants and remaining survivors that we're talking about right now for reparations or some sort of restitution or indemnification. America does not have a problem paying reparations. America has a problem with paying reparations to black people.
Right.
America has never had a problem paying reparations. Take a look at the Japanese that they put in internment camps. Take a look at Native Americans. Take a look at the reparations that were paid to Jewish people. America has no problem paying reparations, and we certainly know America has the money. America has a fundamental problem with paying reparations to black people in this country. And it's a problem. And the lady we were talking about a couple of minutes ago, she should have received reparations. So should other members of her family. So should other members, others of other survivors. So should their families. Should have been receiving reparations. And that was not, and by the way, everyone talks about that being Black Wall Street. There were plenty of Black Wall Streets around the United States. Not too far away from where I live in Durham, not too far away from here in Durham, North Carolina, there's a street in Durham, North Carolina called Parish Street. Parish Street is a Black Wall Street. There's a large plaque right there, and there's one of the oldest Black banks in the United States called M&F Bank, Merchants and Farmers Bank. It's located right there on Parish Street in downtown Durham, North Carolina. It's a Black Wall Street. There are plenty of these nexuses of Black wealth around the United States. There were plenty of Black Wall Streets in the United States. There's still high concentrations of Black wealth around the United States. One of the highest concentrations of Black wealth around the United States is the Capital Beltway area, not too far away from where you are, Collin. Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Prince William County, Loudoun County, high concentrations of Black wealth. Why? Government jobs. Government jobs are designed to be anti-discriminatory. You can't discriminate in the hiring practices in a federal government job. Plus, at the time, many of those jobs that were good paying jobs with high benefits and labor unions to protect workers' rights for the federal government employees, they were good paying jobs. And you didn't necessarily need a college degree to get a good paying job. So you could work, as a secretary at the United States Census Bureau off of Suitland Avenue in Suitland, Maryland. And let's say your husband's a mail carrier for the Postal Service in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. It's 1982. You buy a house for $75,000 or $80,000, and you both are two wage earning people making good money with government jobs. You have a group of other people that are doing the same thing in your area. That's how you build a concentration of Black wealth. That's how you get a quote unquote Black Wall Street in the current day. That's how you get it. That's how it happened 100 years ago. You were able to acquire land. You were able to have businesses. You kept the Black dollar within Black businesses so the dollar would circulate in the Black community. You don't have that now. White people were able to see that these Black people in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and in other Black areas were doing quite well and decided to crush that. That's what happened. By the way, on a musical note that's somewhat related to what we are talking about right now, I'm sure you all are familiar with an R&B group called the Gap Band. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
Gap. Outstanding. Okay, Gap Band.
Speaking in mic.
Yeah, you're a little closer to the mic.
Word gap. Sorry about that. The word gap, it's actually not the word gap as in a space. It's actually an acronym. It stands for Greenwood, Archer, and Pine. Greenwood, Archer, and Pine were three of the streets from the historic Greenwood neighborhood in the Black Wall Street area of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Why? Because the Gap Band were from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Just a fun musical fact that I wanted to share with everybody.
Yep. There's another, trying to remember the show, one of the Watchmen series did an incredible, like live action, like representation of the, massacre there that people should check out if their stomachs are strong enough. It's pretty wild. Even in that watered down version. So, sure. But they threw bombs out of planes, people. It was pretty fucked up. But anyway, I have another friend of the show, Sabrina Salvati, with Dr. Darity and Kristen Mullins, and they were talking about reparations. When was this, Collin?
I believe this was 2 weeks ago, and that I'm not sure what voodoo she was able to do to get Dr. Darity on, but she did it. But Joe, he was one of your professors, correct?
No, he wasn't one of my professors. No, but I've read his book,
right,
From Equality, and in the summer of 2020, when there was this mass rush from quite honestly white people towards Black people, saying, "Hey, look, how can I be a better ally? How can I do right by Black people? How can I be a better white?" And there's a lot of Black people that happened, and I was one of them had that happen to me. and people were like, wait, what resources? What are some of the books I should read? And there were 2 books that I automatically said everybody should read. One is When Affirmative Action Was White by Dr. Ira Katz-Nelson, and the other was From Here to Equality by Dr. Sandy Darity and his wife, Kirsten Mullen. It's an important book. It talks about reparations for Black people, Black Americans in the 21st century. Quite frankly, this should be the kind of text that middle school and high school courses should be based upon. Not just
or I'll do one better if you're teaching African American studies.
See, and I wasn't, see, Collin, you see, and it's interesting you said that. I wasn't necessarily even going to say African American studies. I was going to say history. And economics, not just African American studies.
And these are already banned in Florida, right?
It has to be banned in Florida. And talk about Black people in Florida. But yeah, African American studies, absolutely. But quite frankly, African American history is also a part of American history. Yeah. And there's no, and quite frankly, if America lived up to the ideals that all quote unquote men are created equal, we really wouldn't need a Black History Month now, would we? We wouldn't need African American now, would we? Because everybody would be treated equally, right? But I understand the need for this because we live in a racist country. America was built on racism, founded on racism, and runs on racism. So now, in order to make sure that we have equal representation for history of Black people in this country, sure, we need a Black History Month. It just happens to be the shortest month of the year, but that's a
sounds of Paul Mooney echo in my head. You know,
well, it's true. It's 28, it's 29 on the leap year, but yeah, again, read the book. There's a magnificent historical perspective on the continued impoverishment of Black people in the United States, starting from enslavement, Freedmen's Bureau, 48 Acres and a Mule, Reconstruction, redlining, Jim and Jane Crow, mass incarceration, and now what needs to be done to remedy the harm that's been caused towards Black people for ever since August 20th, 1619. An institution of racism and enslavement that is older than the United States is as an independent nation.
That's the thing. We're not the only ones who should be giving reparations out. You know, there's quite a few, trading companies that might have some money left over to give.
Right. Well, yeah.
So anyway,
we'll watch.
Go ahead.
We'll watch like maybe, I think definitely a few minutes. We're not going to watch the whole thing because it's an hour, but actually need to finish watching this. But please, as you should, especially for those, if Black Lives Matter, watch this.
Yep.
And you can learn how to be a great ally to Black people when it comes to this subject. So
look at my African American over here. Look,
just do it. Look at these.
Another way that the federal government disadvantaged Black Americans was by watching a series of massacres that took place across the country of Black communities. And so we're talking about, moments when Black people who were actively engaged in politics, who were exercising the right to vote, or who were simply, successful in life, who had managed to acquire material wealth, were the targets of jealous white people. And we see this pattern, we have documented over now 100 massacres that took place between Reconstruction and the end of World War II. Many of your audience members may be familiar with Tulsa, Oklahoma, the massacre that took place in 1921, largely because Donald Trump and Joe Biden both went to Tulsa during the 100-year anniversary. And we often say, somewhat cynically, in many ways, the reason why we know about these incredibly successful Black communities is that white people destroyed them. People will say, oh, Wilmington, North Carolina, was the first, was the only coup, the only place in the country where duly elected, legally elected officials were removed from office. And this was in 1898. But we have documented at least 6 such moments when that happened. The earliest of which was in Coushatta, Louisiana, Colfax, Louisiana, 1873, Coushatta, 1874. And what we're seeing too is that there were, basically playbooks that these white people used in these attacks. So I mentioned Wilmington, North Carolina, where Massacre killed hundreds of Black people. And there was a mass exodus of the Black population. And for the next 60 or 70 years, the White Democrat Party, which in those days was more akin in ideology to the Republicans of today, they ruled for another 60 to 70 years. And the Black population just drops tremendously as a consequence of this massacre. But we learned that in Fort Bend County, Texas, which is near where my maternal grandfather was raised, in 1888, 89, so 10 years prior, the white people, the white Democrats drafted what they called a White Men's Declaration of Independence. And they spelled out, what they were going to do. And you see a similar document with the same title, White Men's Declaration of Independence, that was used by these white Democrats in Wilmington. So these are not sporadic moments. And the federal government could have intervened. The federal government could have insisted that these people be brought to trial, but that didn't happen. So for all of these reasons, we say the federal government is the culpable party. And we can talk maybe a little bit later about them being the capable party to pay reparations to Black American descendants of U.S. slavery.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. But there's a bit more to this article if we continue. The ruling, which is where they're talking about this, the fact that the judge threw this out, right? Undercut an effort to seek justice for a rampage by white mobs that burned Tulsa's Black neighborhood to the ground. As many as 300 people were killed. Some 35 blocks were leveled and hundreds of home and businesses destroyed. The case originally was filed in September 2020 under the state's public nuisance law. After many twists and turns in August 2022, Wall allowed the lawsuit to continue. 3 survivors of the massacre, each over 100 years old, were the most recent plaintiffs in the case. In the filing, the plaintiffs said that they were seeking to abate the public nuisance caused by the rampage in Greenwood and to obtain benefits unjustly received by the defendants as a result of it. The lawsuit quoted Tulsa Mayor G.T. Bynum, who had said that the racial and economic disparities that still exist in the city can be traced back to that massacre. In the aftermath of this attack, the petition alleged the defendants enacted unconstitutional laws that deprived Greenwood residents of the use of their property and thwarted the community's efforts to rebuild by redirecting public resources to benefit predominantly white areas of Tulsa. The defendants have imposed or supported unlawful policies and actions that stifled the ability of all Greenwood residents impacted by the massacre to rebuild and thrive, the petition said. As remedies, the plaintiffs sought an accounting of the damages caused during the massacre and an order requiring the defendants to replace homes and businesses destroyed during the attack and to return misappropriated land to the Black community with interest, hopefully, among other requests. Lawyers representing the survivors plan to appeal the decision, according to a statement from Justice for Greenwood Foundation, an organization founded by Demario Solomon Simmons, one of the plaintiffs' lawyers. The dismissal of this case is just one more example of how America, including Tulsa's, legacy is disproportionately and unjustly borne by the Black community, the statement read. We will continue to fight on behalf of and alongside our survivors. Lawyers for the city of Tulsa and the Tulsa Regional Chamber argued the 3 survivors failed to demonstrate they were especially injured, separate from all of those who suffered as a result of the attack. Without establishing this, the lawyers argued in motions filed in court last year the plaintiffs couldn't sustain their public nuisance claims. The city lawyers also pushed back against the survivors' unjust enrichment claims, in which they argued the city, county, and regional chamber have economically benefited from the matter, using it to draw tourists. Simply being connected to a historical event does not provide a person with unlimited rights to seek compensation from any project in any way related to that historical event. I'm sure some other people might argue.
Pause.
Thank you.
The
Let's hear it.
Japanese.
That's historical.
The
Yep.
Japanese.
Yep.
The Jews.
Yep.
No offense.
Native Americans.
Native Americans.
Not to mention the white slave owners
Historical.
who actually got compensation.
Right.
Anyway, lawyers for the city wrote.
And real
in a
quick, before you
Go ahead.
continue, Reef, before you continue,
Speaking to the mic.
you know, sorry, and you know, it talks about a public nuisance. The last time I checked, having your buildings burnt to the ground and your property taken from you would certainly qualify as a public nuisance.
It's far more than a nuisance. That's destruction
thank you.
of
It's far
property,
more than a nuisance.
assault, murder, like, you know, among other things, you know, arson. Like, how many things we want to rack up here, right? So anyway, lawyers for the city wrote, they continue, if that were the case, every person connected to any historical event could make similar unjust enrichment claims against every museum or point of remembrance.
They have. Exactly.
They have.
Yeah, funny how that might be the precedent. Bynum said Sunday the city hasn't, which that says that they're getting rid of it because of the precedent it would set. That's why they're getting rid of it. That's what they just admitted to right there. So Bynum said Sunday the city hasn't received the judge's full order, and the city is still committed to investing in the Greenwood district, including finding the graves of 1921 Tulsa race massacre victims, which we don't know where all of those are. So, you know, there was like how many died? 300 or so.
Yes.
You know, so
I'll argue probably more than that, but
well, close this out. You know, like thoughts. I know there's many.
As I said, the judge should be hanged. Honestly, the judge should be hanged. You know, like, but on a more macro scale, other than you sharing the story, Reef, I have not heard this on Twitter or in the news.
Yep.
This should have been.
I saw Jay Buffont share it.
Right.
That's about it.
Right. And I believe, to my knowledge, Savvy also reported on this.
Yep.
Right.
I think.
So, and this is not for this audience because you guys, I mean, I might be talking about you all, but I want to assume the best of you all.
Mm-hmm.
Those of you who are like Black Lives Matter or still have that in your profile, and you hear stories about such as this, and it doesn't make you angry enough that you do not say anything, get rid of it right now.
Agreed.
Because I tell you what, we are not going to rely on mainstream media to report on this because it's not going to work in their interest to talk about it, and we know that. So moving on. But for independent media, for us, who talks about wanting to bring truth, who want to bring justice to this nation, this is one of those things. And if you remain complicit after, and I'm going to challenge you all. And Normally I give these challenges in joking, but I'm going to be very serious because probably this clip is going to be, this will be clipped out. Probably by the weekend. Shout out to Fanto, our editor, for clipping our streams every week. Do your damn job and share this out. And tag us, JB, whichever Black independent creator that you know of to this.
Yep. Or white.
If you really, or whatever, whoever.
Not
if
or,
they,
and.
If you really, if you really care about Black Lives Matter, because the idea that this story has not been mentioned in the media at all, especially within our space, but we get to talk, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go off for a second, but we get to talk about all the drama bullshit that doesn't mean anything in light of, and I'm speaking as a Black immigrant who will not benefit from this.
Yep.
Okay? But I'll be damned if my cousins, my African-American cousins, are not going to be entitled to the things that belong to them on account of a few white people who hate Black people that much to withhold a promise to them as a result of the bigotry and the lies and the torture and the hell that our ancestors had to go through in the last 500 years. The very least you can do is share this clip out if you care about Black Lives Matter. If you do not, you can remove it, and I don't fucking care. Unsubscribe to this channel right now. I am dead serious. Because it's fun to talk about all the drama and all the kind of stuff and all this kind of stuff. And I'm speaking because back in 2020, I had a lot of white people who I had not heard from in maybe like a decade call me and ask me, Collin, how are you doing? I haven't heard of these motherfuckers for maybe about that long. But in their white guilt, decided to call me because of whatever feelings that they were feeling in light of George Floyd, and they thought of me. And guess what? I haven't heard from them since then, most of them. Do you know the first people who called me in that whole thing? My brothers from Uganda were the first people to check on me and ask me how I was doing. No one from this country. It was my brothers and sisters from Uganda who called me and asked, Uncle Collin, how is everything? We saw what happened. And the first thing I was like, how in the hell did you see this? They said, we saw it online. And I said, I'm glad you did. Because this is what I've been trying to tell you for the last decade that I came to visit you in this country, but due to certain reasons, I could not fully express, and words cannot express the reality of what you've been lied to in terms of the bullshit that happens in this country, that many white people go over there and kind of say these things that make these young youth want to come over here. I told them, you're better off staying there. I understand that it's hard for you, but at least over there, you're among your own. And you can handle it in terms of in terms of your culture. You do not want to come here and deal with the bullshit of all this white supremacy that exists in this country. But long story short, I had to have international Black people check in on me. Not my white friends, so-called, who have known me forever, who checked in on me first. So as I said, do yourself a favor and fucking share this clip once we do. Because you're not going to hear, especially any of these Black pundits in mainstream media talking about this. And they will be the first to say, oh, we need white reparations and all this kind of stuff. But they're going to talk about all the drama and all that kind of bullshit, which unfortunately in independent media that we also talk about, and we get distracted from, you know, talking about stories like this that will be meaningful to Black people in particular. And I'm not sorry that I went off, but I think it is important because when it comes to issues regarding Medicare for all and all these other things, you expect us, especially Black people on the left, to rally for you in terms of those issues. But when it comes to issues like reparations, you guys run away.
Yeah, boy.
If you care about my life, if you care about Joe's life, if you care about the people that you care about who happen to be Black, this should be of your concern. And you will share this clip. And you will talk to people about this clip. And you know what? I don't need you to be, and I've had these conversations with you, I don't need you all to be an expert on reparations. I just want you to be willing to listen to the reality of what we're asking for and what demands are being made or trying to be made. Because I admit within the Black community, like we need to have a discussion as to what reparations is going to look like and how we can properly demand for it. So that's something we need to handle in-house, and I will admit that. But in the meantime, if you're non-Black and you're listening, do yourself a favor, at least talk to us about the situation and walk in solidarity with us as we figure this out amongst ourselves. And that's all I got to say on that.
Perfect. Well said. Well said. And by the way, nicely done with that Street Fighter 2 sound sample. Well,
I think that's
well
Street
done.
Fighter 2, Street Fighter 1.
Street Fighter 2. Collin, there's not much I really need to add other than, you know, reparations are important. Reparations are necessary. Reparations are vital. When you think about the root word of reparations, it's repair. It means to fix. It needs to fix. We have to fix the problem. We have to fix the damage caused by the greatest crime against humanity in human history, the enslavement of Black people. Not just the enslavement of American descendants of Africans, but the enslavement of all Black people across the Caribbean diaspora especially. I can say this to you, Collin, because you and I have a similar background. You were born in England just like me. You came to America at a relatively young age just like me. The only real difference background-wise between the two of us is both of my parents are from Trinidad. You only have one parent from Trinidad and another parent from Barbados. But essentially, our backgrounds are the same. And as you so accurately said earlier on, my claim and your claim for reparations would not come from the United States government because neither of us are descending from an enslaved African. Our claims for reparations would come from the British monarchy because our descendants came from a country that colonized the Caribbean, the Great Britain. There is an organization that I urge everyone to take a look at. It's called CARICOM, C-A-R-I-C-O-M.
And Joe, we've talked about CARICOM on this show, and we've mentioned they have demands.
They have a 10-point reparations plan,
which we've gone through which we've talked about on this show. And you say internationalize the struggle. If African Americans at least look, I'm not saying in the Caribbean we have our mess together, but at least we have demands.
And they're on a website and we know exactly what they are.
We don't, at least where's ours in America? We're asking for reparations. We don't even know what we're asking for. So that's what I said, like in terms of us, we will figure that out. We need to figure that out amongst ourselves, but that's a discussion that we need to have in-house. What non-Black people need to do is when we talk about reparations to you, don't just dismiss it. Don't just say it's never going to happen. Don't say you don't deserve it or whatever thing that you're going to say. If Black lives really matter to you, then our words should matter to you and what we're saying, and you should be able to help us advocate for those needs. And we will take care of the rest.
And it's not just a matter of words, it's also a matter of action, as I said about 2 hours ago. Because again, feelings and emotions only go so far. There has to be action. And I want to go ahead and take about another 30 seconds or so going over what CARICOM Reparations 10-point plan actually is. 1, full formal apology. Number 2, Indigenous Peoples Development Programs. That's important. Number 3, funding for repatriation to Africa. Number 4, the establishment of cultural institutions and the return of cultural heritage. Number 5, assistance in remedying the public health crisis. Number 6, education programs. Number 7, the enhancement of historical and cultural knowledge exchanges. Number 8, psychological rehabilitation as the result of the transmission of trauma, which is generational trauma, mind you. Number 9, the right to development through use of technology. And number 10 is debt cancellation and monetary compensation. Now, under each of these 10 bullet points is a description for what the specific demands and general practices are. And at least CARICOMReparations.org has this 10-point plan, and there is some substance to it. American descendants of enslaved Africans and Black people in America, we're not even sure what we should be asking for other than the continued demand for reparations. There's
demand it and maybe cut the check. That's why I keep hearing.
Yeah, we keep hearing cut the check, but what do we do with that check? It's no different. What do we do with that check? And this is way more than just economics. Take a look at what we're talking about here: technology, repatriation, cultural repatriation, enhancement of cultural knowledge exchanges. How else are you going to know who you are as a people when your culture was taken from you? When your history was whitewashed and rewritten to fit a white narrative? How do you know who you are? So, Collin, when you tell your cousins you're better off being there, I agree with that, because the reason why they're better off being there is because at least they know who they are in Uganda, because they understand what their culture is. They understand who they are historically. They know where they came from. They know who they are. Again, I mentioned the song Exodus by Bob Marley hours ago. And Bob Marley also said in that song, we know where we're going. We know where we're from. We're leaving Babylon. We're going to the promised land. They know where they're going because they know where they came from. Black people in America, and I'm talking specifically about descendants of Black people, don't know where we're going. And they don't have a plan for reparations. Why? Because historically, we don't know where we're from, because their culture was taken from them. It was taken on slave ships and whitewashed as of August 20th, 1619. How are you going to know where you're going to go when you don't know where you came from? That's why the CARICOMReparations.org 10-point plan is so important. And Collin, you said this earlier, it's about internationalizing the struggle. I would love to see the beef that Black Americans and Caribbean Americans that seem to have. I would love to see that squashed.
Yeah.
And I would love to see solidarity between Black Americans and Caribbean Americans, especially when it comes to reparations.
Right.
And again,
we're tied by that.
We're tied by yes.
And yes, there's going to be regional differences that would be unique.
Yes.
To wherever we got dropped off. Yes. but it's the same imperialistic powers that brought us to where we are today, regardless if you're in the Caribbean, in America, in Europe, or elsewhere.
Absolutely.
It's that same.
Yeah.
It's still that same imperialistic white supremacist power that brought us here. So, and your African Americans movement and success in reparations is only going to help everyone else in the diaspora. So you need us, you know, like, and so I say that because it is to your benefit as a Black immigrant to be in I'm saying I want to be in solidarity with you. And I know that for some Black people are kind of dismissive of that. And I'm like, you know what? You're really going to dismiss me, who's actually trying to help you get to, at minimum, a demand for reparations in a way besides money. You know,
we talked about stuff like universal reparations,
right?
You know, on this show before.
So as I said, there's a lot in-house among Black people that we need to have, and we will work on that ourselves. But for non-Black people, you know what your role is.
Yep.
You know, if you want us to continue being solidarity with you with issues that you care about, all we ask is that you be in solidarity with us for issues that we care about, even if you don't necessarily understand it. And how? I'd rather you did it, because then you can be in a position to learn.
And Collin, something to go along with this, in many instances, the issues that white people want Black people to support have less social footing and less merit than the call for reparations for American descendants of enslaved Africans and reparations for the Caribbean diaspora and any other Black people or other people who have been colonized by imperial power. A perfect example of this, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about this, is abortion. Abortion. Right. Okay. Anytime abortion comes up, there's a whole lot of liberal white women that want Black people to support abortion. This is not about what I think about women's reproductive rights. That's not what this discussion is about. What this discussion is about is a history of abortion, and how, quite honestly, if people knew where abortion actually came from, no Black person should support abortion at all. Shouldn't support it, because it came from Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger was a eugenicist and a white supremacist. She is also the architect of Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood was originally called the Negro Project. And the objective of the Negro Project was to terminate Black pregnancies to maintain the superiority of the white race. That is what abortion's initial programming was. So whenever abortion rights are under attack, like we saw a little more than a year ago with Roe versus Wade, there were a whole lot of Black people that stood in solidarity with, quite honestly, liberal white women for abortion rights. But the last time I checked, I didn't see a whole bunch of liberal white women standing alongside Black people when it came to reparations. And there's certainly a stronger case to be made for reparations for American descendants of enslaved Africans and reparations for people from the Caribbean diaspora and Africa, as opposed to a single issue such as abortion. There's certainly, and quite frankly, if more white people understood how important reparations are, and again, everything that comes with reparations, including healthcare, you wouldn't need to have abortion you wouldn't necessarily need to be using abortion as a political tool, because you would look at abortion for what it really is, which is a form of healthcare rights, as instead of a political football to be used every few years to garner votes. Again, a rising tide floats all boats. A rising tide floats all boats. So if everybody is uplifted, everybody benefits, including Black people. Everybody benefits. So that's also why reparations are important. It's also why reparations are important. We talked about, Collin, you said the words truth earlier on, probably about 10 or 15 minutes ago. I used to live in Canada. I understand, at least I have a better understanding of the various Indigenous populations across Canada, especially in the British Columbia area, because I understand that there are loads of First Nations communities that are still suffering from the residential schools and the thousands of bodies that were slaughtered as a result of the Catholic Church in these residential schools. And there is a commission that the Canadian government created called the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. But what ended up happening is there wasn't a whole lot of truth and there was no reconciliation. None. And nor were there reparations paid to not only the survivors of First Nations communities, but the descendants of the First Nations communities. That also, the reparations also needs to be paid to them too, because the Canadian government has done them wrong. Reparations should also be paid to our Palestinian brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Huh? That needs to take place. When we talk about reparations, and I know, Collin, we both come from a country, we both come from a country that colonized the descendants of our parents. We both were born in England, they colonized the Caribbean. France needs to take a look at itself in the mirror and start paying reparations.
Right.
Same for Belgium. Same for
Spain.
Germany. Same for Spain. Same for
Portugal.
Same for the Netherlands. They need to take a look into this. And this goes to a bigger topic, and I'll have to close with this because I need to get a little bit of sleep. But
yeah,
Collin, you said during the summer that the people that checked on you during the summer, it wasn't your white friends, it was your brothers from Africa.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it wasn't necessarily Black people in America, nor was it European people from countries that had a history of colonization. I was being checked on and had people look at, see what was going on with me from countries that did not have a history of colonization. My friends in Sarajevo, Bosnia, my friends in Ljubljana, Slovenia, my friends in Zagreb, Croatia. They were the people that checked on me first. Why did they check on me first? Again, this is just my way my mind is working. I have a feeling that they checked on me first because, number one, their countries don't have a history of colonization. Number two, their countries were all at one point part of a larger country called Yugoslavia. And 30 years ago, they went through a genocide, a war. And they eventually figured out that hating a group of people that came from the same country is stupid. Hating somebody because they speak a language that is slightly different and they practice a different religion is stupid. So through the process of logical extension, hating somebody because of the color of their skin is also stupid. Maybe that's me because of the wonderful experiences I've had in that part of the world. Maybe that's just my line of thinking. But those are the people that checked on me first. I didn't have a whole lot of people at first from England check on me, or some of my German friends check on me right away.
Speaking the mic.
Sorry. I didn't necessarily have a bunch of my friends from England or Germany check on me right away. It was my people from Eastern Europe that checked on me first because of everything that I just explained. This is a difficult topic. It's difficult not to discuss because of the facts. It's difficult to discuss because of the emotions. It's difficult. It's an emotionally heavy conversation. It's not a factually difficult conversation to have because the facts are there. The history is there. As long as you're willing to acknowledge it, and as long as you're willing to do the research and homework to understand what happened. And Collin, I appreciate everything you said earlier. This is much bigger than just, hey, acknowledging what happened. There has to be action.
Yeah.
There has to be action. And there has to be action. And it's past the point of waiting for House Resolution 40 to be signed so a study for reparations can be called into play.
Which the UK has a study.
Huh?
We spoke about that on the show.
Yep.
The UK has a study studying this.
Yep.
Ain't a royal without ties. Yeah.
Right. And the royal family has ties to corporations in, well, I mean, it makes sense, in Virginia.
Except for Princess Di. She's good. You know, rest in peace.
You know, so I would argue that Black people in other places in the diaspora are way ahead of African Americans here in a lot of ways.
I agree.
So basically, African Americans need to step up. And again, there is a beef somewhat with African Americans and Black immigrants in this country. And as I said, that's an issue that we need to have in-house amongst ourselves. But it's worth it if the idea is we can understand where the commonalities are with reparations, regardless of the region of the world you're from.
Right.
And seeing where we can be in solidarity with each other on that. And as I say, all we're asking for our non-Black people who care about us and love us is that you just work in solidarity alongside with us as we figure this out. And don't dismiss it because it's an issue that doesn't necessarily apply to you, or you don't understand it, or is some of you, and I'm going to call some of you out, you don't think we deserve it. I said it. Yeah, I said it. And I know some people, I don't think that's anyone in this audience, but some of you on the left do not believe that people don't deserve reparations. And to that, I could say to you, you can kick rocks.
Huh?
I got you, homie.
Don't worry, I got you.
Collin, one last thing, and I know something that I mentioned when I read the 10-point reparation plan from the CARICOM reparations.org website was history. Earlier tonight, about a little more than 2 hours ago, we talked about Israel, we talked about Palestine. And I said probably about 20 minutes ago that the greatest crime against humanity in human history is the enslavement of Africans. Not too far away from that, right alongside, is what happened with Jewish people in Germany. Jewish people in Germany, what happened to them was atrocious. It's horrible, it's disgusting, and we all know what happened there. And at the same time, we are constantly reminded of what's happened to Jewish people all the time. And I have no problem with that. In fact, I encourage it. But if our Jewish brothers and sisters are going to constantly remind the world of what happened in Nazi Germany, then I certainly think it's apropos for Black people across the diaspora to remind the world of what happened to Black people over the past 5 centuries. Because again, if it's about human rights violations, if it's about crimes against humanity, if it's about suffering, if it's about treating people differently because of where they live, or where they came from, or their religious practices, or the color of their skin, then all suffering has intersectionality. All suffering is connected. And if we're going to be constantly reminded about the struggles that Jewish people had to deal with in Nazi Germany, and I do believe that that has merit, and we should be reminded of our history, regardless of how sordid it is, then certainly what happened to enslaved Africans across the diaspora, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in the Caribbean, and definitely in the United States, also deserves the same amount of historical reminding. It also deserves the same energy. It also deserves the same context when we talk about what happened to Black people over the past 500 years.
Best we can do is Juneteenth ice cream. Oh God. Anyway, this has been a great episode, Joe. We appreciate you so much for coming. You made episode go real well, you know. So
you've been waiting to do that all night, weren't you?
All night. I forgot at the top. But anyway,
we have your information because I know people were like, we want Joe Nice's info, and all that information is in the description. But share for the people. Where can people find you? And you're going on tour. You are touring right now. So
I've been traveling a lot over the past few weeks or so. I just got back into America. Gosh, when was it? Last Friday. I was in Istanbul, Turkey, the first couple of weeks of this month. Played a show out there. Played Kansas City on Saturday. I taught a DJing seminar and then played the show. On Saturday of this week, I'm in Boone, North Carolina. Sunday, I'm playing the Soundhaven Music Festival. Next Saturday is Houston, Texas. Then I need to go to Trinidad for about a week to take care of some business because my dad passed away a while back and I got to take care of some stuff down there. Then it's Mesa, Arizona on the 19th. The 26th is the Fractal Music Festival. It's in Massachusetts. I forget it's in Needham, Massachusetts. So it's about an hour north.
It's just Needham. That's just outside Boston. It's like half an hour out.
It's actually nowhere near Boston. Actually,
Needham, Mass.
Needham. Yes. I think that's the name of this town. I think that's the name of the town. It's about an hour north of Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay. Not sure of that.
I think that's where it is. And then after that, it's the Asia tour. China's already on board, a couple things in Hong Kong, and I'm waiting for a couple other things to kind of shake themselves out. And then right after that, I'm in Europe for about 3 to 4 weeks. So
Collin, let's sneak into his luggage. We'll never notice that we're there.
Gonna try to apply to grad school again, this time for a PhD. I applied for the PhD program in musicology at the University of North Carolina. I did not get accepted. I understood why, because what I wanted to research and what their expertise is, it was two different things. So I'm going to apply for a PhD in communications at the University of North Carolina this fall, and we'll see what happens. If I get accepted, I will become a grad student again, and I'll start up in the fall of 2024. So we shall see what happens.
Then people have to call you Dr. DJ Joe Nice.
Nice. Dr. Dubstep. You know
Dr.
what it is.
Dubstep. The doc.
I think it's a 4 or 5 year program. We'll see. But
nice.
I want to continue my education because, you know, I've been involved in a musical culture that has given me so much. And I feel I need to contribute in some way. And not just with me playing shows or me learning how to make music and putting out my own music now. But what I also want to do is make sure that I contribute to the culture in some meaningful way. And I already know what I want to research. I already know what I want to talk about. It's just a matter of gaining acceptance into the school and then being able to do the coursework, which is no problem. And then write up something that makes sense. Then a few years down the line, Dr. Nice. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
College abroad is a thing as well. But yeah, tell people where they can find you.
I do.
Look, I'm everywhere. Just, Joe Nice DJ, JoeNice DJ on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud, Mixcloud, Threads, which I barely use, but whatever, it's Threads. It's another social media platform. That's it. I'm still trying to revamp the whole merch website, joenicedj.net. I need to find a new printer that can print up a lot of the designs that I have right now. But that's what I've got going on. So that's where I am. I'm around. I want to thank everybody that decided to spend 2 hours and 20 minutes watching us talk about a variety of topics. It's important. And Reef and Collin, I especially want to thank you, brothers, for doing everything that you all do, because it's important. It's a labor of love. It's a necessity. It's a public service. And it's not just a job. At least I feel it's not a job for each of you. It's a responsibility. It's a response. I said the words truth and reconciliation not too long ago. And I feel that it's a job to tell the truth. It's a job to speak the truth. It's a job to continually breathe life into truth. And just like scripture says, the truth will set you free. And hopefully, as long as you brothers keep telling the truth and reporting, not telling stories, but reporting on what's happening out in the world, and letting people know that what's happening in the world in some place that you've never heard of, if you've never been to people you will never meet, could and most likely will affect you some way. It's important to tell that there's what's happening. It's important to report on those situations. It's necessary. You brothers are necessary. And I couldn't be happier and proud to be involved with you guys, especially on a conversation like tonight in this space.
Yep.
And for anybody that's watching on YouTube right now, and if you watch the podcast later on next week or wherever, that's awesome. But again, if there's any way you can contribute, either financially or a retweet, a share the video on Facebook, a comment in the chat, in the live chat, a super chat, a thumbs up, an emoji, whatever it is, an order to DoorDash so Collin can get some roti and some poloi from a good Trinidadian place.
Yeah, I'm down for that.
Right? You know what it is. Whatever it is, all contributions are important. All contributions matter, because the work that these brothers are doing, it matters. It's important. And I firmly believe that.
Speaking of our work, this week we got more stuff. Tomorrow night, Bread and Circuses. Go check out Bread and Circuses doing his thing. Angel in the Afternoon on Friday, doing a good stuff. After that, Politics of Survival with Tara Reid with, I believe, Lee Camp. So stay tuned for that. But Saturday, check in on our Twitter to see if we're doing Bitch with Comrade Misty. Sundays, how did we miss that? You can find all our links, indienews.network, real easy. All the members are in there.
Nice.
So, anyway, anything to say before we get out of here, Care Bear?
Joe, it's always a pleasure having you on. And, our paths will cross again for sure. But our audience loves you, and
love the audience.
We'll definitely have you on again real soon. So safe travels.
Yep.
To you as you continue on your tour.
I'm around. The phone's charged and the bill is paid. So
yep.
Always,
go find his stuff. Go watch him live. Do all the things. But remember, kids, as always, labels are bad. Stay independent. Good night, fam.
Have a good week, everyone.
All right, peace, everybody.
We want to talk right down to earth in a language that everybody here can easily understand.